Good evening, everybody. Today is January 19th, 2020. Welcome to the Board of Education special meeting. As you all know, occasionally we have these meetings to address a variety of topics, including matters that relate to our committees. Today happens to be reserved in large part for us to discuss matters relating to finance issues, which will be chaired by Commissioner LeBron. I should also tell you and remind some of you that we have our general business meetings where we talk about things, a variety of things on our agenda, but this is not one of those nights. Again, most of the stuff that we'll talk about tonight will relate to the district's finances. The other thing I wanted to do tonight before we begin our considerable agenda tonight is to reserve a moment of silence. Now, normally I know we do this at our business meetings, but the tragedies that occurred in Washington, D.C., and throughout this nation that we're experiencing on the regular, daily, suggests that we should all take some time, even during the course of our public discussions, to contemplate the significant loss that has occurred throughout this nation, particularly on in our most sacred political ground, the United States Capitol, but more globally and more nationally, I should say, in the United States. I understand that the death toll from COVID is 400,000. That's an incredible number that touches each and every board member and each and every American. Just an incredible figure. And so the amount of loss that we have experienced as a nation, but more significantly as individuals, those 400 individuals were mothers, fathers, aunts, uncles, grandpas, aunties, uncles. And they were fellow employees, they were friends, they were cousins. And so please join the Board of Education in a brief moment of silence and sending up prayers and emotional support to those who are left to deal with this significant, unprecedented tragedy and loss. Thank you. Next on our agenda is a call to order. Actually, that's already been done. The meeting is officially taken place. I also wanted to give you guys a little information, my colleagues a little information, remind you all that both Vice President Elliott and I are going to be tied up this evening, probably an hour into the meeting, give or take. Neither of us know exactly when we'll be coming back. I have informed Commissioner Powell that in the event that I take the gavel back, by and large, it looks like most of this meeting will be chaired by Commissioner LeBron. So she will have the gavel during the finance meeting. But there are occasions where it is necessary for the chair of this organization to resume the gavel, particularly in matters involving executive session, which takes place at the end of the meeting. Should Vice President Elliott and I not come back in time for that part of the meeting, I have asked Commissioner Powell to serve as chair. For those of you who don't know that, Commissioner Powell is the most senior member of the Board of Education. And so that is the exclusive basis upon which I have asked her to chair the balance of the meeting. She is the most senior member. And she will chair the meeting in my absence or in Vice President Elliott's absence if she's not able to return. Again, I will tell my colleagues, neither of us are sure when we're going to be coming back to the meeting. It may take me longer to come back than Vice President Elliott. So in the event that neither of us get back, again, Commissioner Powell will chair the meeting. All right, so there's some resolutions under consideration.
We just have a few speakers before then.
Thank you very much. That's right. I think we have 3. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to be welcoming in Ms. Catherine Rebels. I hope I pronounced your name right.
Yes.
You will be speaking about hybrid learning plan, I understand. All right, 3 minutes, Catherine, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Catherine Repoltz and I'm an educator at School of the Arts. 70% of our student population across the district has elected to remain learning remotely. Remote learning has been and still is the safest educational method during this pandemic. Rather than invest in resources that would improve remote learning for all of our students, the district is electing to invest in a hybrid learning system that will make learning worse for our students who are remaining remote, as it removes many of the aspects of our full remote system that have been working. At last week's meeting, the superintendent's team said that the switch to bell schedules would not increase screen time for students. This is false, at least at the high school level. At SOTA, during remote learning, each of our 9 periods has been 30 minutes long. The students all received an hour lunch at the same time, so the period that would have been their assigned lunch became a screen break for them. This means that they have had 240 minutes of on-screen class time. With the transition to bell schedules, classes will now be 42 minutes long. The hour lunch has been removed, so the students' only screen break during the day now also combines as their lunchtime. The students now have 336 minutes of on-screen class time. This is an increase of 96 minutes, over an hour and a half. With this shift, high school students are losing their social emotional check-in each morning, which serves as unstructured social time with peers and teachers, something they do not otherwise get remotely. Students are also losing a half hour at the end of each day when both they and their teachers were not actively in class and they could easily schedule extra help. Combined with the additional office hours time lost on Wednesdays, we are moving from 4 hours of unencumbered office hours time each week to only 1 hour. Office hours have been an instrumental way to provide individualized attention to remote students, and this change is decreasing the remote students' opportunity to receive this individual help. All remote students across the district, elementary and secondary, are losing the hour lunch that had previously been provided to them, allowing enough time for students who needed to travel to distribution sites to get food enough time to do so. Losing this hour will be extremely detrimental to remote students who depend on these food sites, as they may end up missing class time in order to travel, and their lunchtime may not even align with the times that the sites are open. Expecting teachers to teach both in-person and remote students simultaneously will also be detrimental to remote students' learning. Some examples of ways that this is already being seen in phase 1 include the camera view on computers is very narrow, so if teachers need to move, the remote students will lose sight of them. The sound quality is low and muffled with teachers wearing masks and face shields, so it is difficult for the remote students to hear. When in-person students are in transition, such as bathroom breaks, washing hands, sanitizing, etc., the teacher needs to focus on ensuring the safety of the in-person students so they cannot work with the remote students during that time. Without in-person students at the elementary and middle school levels having access to Chromebooks, teachers cannot provide the same work to both groups. By design, asking teachers to teach both remote and in-person groups at once is going to decrease the effectiveness of remote instruction, which teachers previously could devote their full time and attention to. By investing in this hybrid model, when the majority of our students are electing to stay remote, the district is choosing to provide a lower quality of education to the majority of their constituents.
Thank you, Ms. Rebels. We appreciate you addressing the board this evening. Please let us know if you have any further comments. Okay.
Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. So we also have another speaker in the room this evening, Ms. Leanne Dupree. Ms. Dupree will be speaking as a staff member regarding protocols and safety during the pandemic. Ms. Dupree?
Yes, thank you so much.
3 minutes, okay.
I'm going to be reading testimonials from people in the district that are afraid to speak up due to the retaliation that has been experienced so far. All right. I'm extremely disheartened by the decision to move forward with reopening in phase 2, when it seems our teachers and students are already in unsafe situations in phase 1. There were 734 positive COVID tests administered by the district during the first week of in-person learning. How is this an acceptable positivity rate? Never mind. Other district test results were publicized in the news as a source of reassurance about the safety of schools. Are these results shared with parents? Did they know they are sending their children to schools with such high numbers of COVID? I'm concerned about many aspects of the way reopening is being rolled out, but especially feel that RCSD has not been transparent with families as they make a very important decision regarding their child. This is another testimonial. I'm concerned with a new bell schedule for secondary students remaining 100% remote. The added screen time in earlier hours contributes to Zoom fatigue. I worry that it will perpetuate absences and discourage students from participating virtually. Not only that, but the MiFi units only have 10 gigs of data. Once that runs out, using the web resources can be very frustrating for both the student and teacher. Furthermore, 30 minutes for lunch is not an adequate time for a student to pick up a bad lunch from an RCSD building and make it back in time for their next class. Another states that I wanted them to tell me where all the 3 different types of cleaning spray were. Remember, Stacy said we were supposed to have 3 versions? I've got shields, but no face masks besides 1 box of disposables. How is 1 box supposed to last my kids or the adults? I came home, sprayed down everything, stripped off my clothes, and washed my hands vigorously. I'm nervous and just trying to smile through it. And that is what I had for you tonight. I just want to share that families and staff are not feeling that we are returning safely and this plan is being rolled out well. So thank you so much for listening, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Ms. Dupree. We appreciate your time as well.
Thanks.
I have the last speaker entering the room, Ms. Amanda Burke. She is a staff member and she'll be addressing the board regarding the COVID vaccine. Ms. Burke, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening.
You have
My name
3
is.
minutes.
This evening, I would like to share some thoughts on the COVID-19 vaccine. There have been previous discussions on mandating the COVID vaccine, and I implore you, Superintendent Leslie Myers-Small and board members, to consider all options. Controversies over the efficacy, safety, and morality of vaccinations have been a long-standing tension. It begins to violate individual liberties. All health interventions, including vaccinations, include health risks, adverse reactions, and long-term effects. Good public health policies balance both individual rights and community needs. The RCSD must recognize and respect diverse social and cultural perspectives towards immunization policies. Our Surgeon General stated on Good Morning America, quote, "These vaccines were tested as an outcome of severe disease, not a prevention. We don't know yet if they will prevent you from infection," unquote. I respect every individual who feels the vaccine is a good medical decision for them and would never interfere in their choice. And I ask that same respect in return to make my own choices regarding vaccinations. We have to be careful using the terms mandates and consequences when we are discussing such ideas. The decision for how I as an individual to proceed with health decisions, medical procedures, and the safety of my body should and will remain between my professional physician and myself. I am really hoping and imploring that the RCSD will not be pushing this agenda as a mandate followed by consequences, yet I am asking that you consider the words strongly recommended instead of mandate. The flu vaccine is not mandated for students or staff, so as this should not be either. I look for the district to make a respectful decision moving forward, echoing their love and respect for students with their faculty. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. We appreciate you joining us this evening. President White, that does conclude the speakers for this evening.
Again, on behalf of the board, I want to thank our 3 speakers tonight, Ms. Rebholz, Ms. Dupree, and Ms. Burke. They best exemplify what democracy means and how it can be exercised peaceably and effectively. So we appreciate them doing that. And we always welcome citizens to join us and share their comments and concerns. Madam Clerk, could you remind folks how they could do that in the future?
Sure. So members of the public who would like to sign up to speak at board meetings may do so by noon of the day of the meeting by calling the board office or by reaching out to us via our email, boardofelducation@rcsdk12.org. And if you do so, you will be contacted to sign you up on the list. And we will also provide you with the Zoom link for the meeting. If you have comments that you would like to submit into the record, you may also do that by emailing us. And the comments are posted to our website on the day of the meeting and shared with board members. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, if you don't mind, I'd like to take this time. I won't mention them by name because I'm sure they prefer to operate anonymously, but you do have a great team of people that assist you in gathering those names and talking to those folks. And on behalf of the Board of Education, we say thank you, and we remind the community that their taxpayer dollars are being used very effectively, as these folks are really the vanguards for facilitating how democracy works again peaceably and effectively. So we thank them, your staff, your colleagues, for assisting us in gathering together these folks' interests in speaking. So again, I won't mention them by name, but we thank every one of your staff members that help us do that. All right, next item on the agenda was special meeting discussions. We wanted to talk about the fund balance policy and how that might, if at all, be changed. I think the best way, and my colleagues have, may recall, we had this conversation, I think last week or a week or two ago. We're sort of revisiting the conversation, and I think the best way, unless someone has some other ideas to inaugurate the conversation today, is to let the superintendent summarize her memo that she sent to us. I think it was last week. I did not have a chance to see it. Were you going to say something, Madam Clerk?
Yes, actually, that's the Finance Committee. What's next is the resolutions, consideration of resolutions.
Well, that's what I asked you in
Yes.
the email. List those resolutions for me. That's what I was asking about.
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
the resolutions that were tabled from the December 17th business meeting 2020 are the committed funds resolutions for health insurance and for transportation, resolutions 578 and 579. They were tabled considering the discussion regarding the fund balance had not come to fruition, and so I don't know if you want to have the Finance Committee discuss the policies first and then. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think that would be best because I don't think we can act on these until we have an understanding about our fund balance policy. I see our clerk shaking her head. Madam Superintendent, does that make sense to you? I know we talked about it earlier. Oops, was I frozen?
Yes.
Leslie, does that make sense to you? Okay, all right. So then why don't we go ahead? Why don't I go ahead and turn the gavel over to Commissioner LeBron to chair the Finance Committee?
Thank you, President White. I'm going to start with the same thing you just said. So yes,
Okay.
Dr. Myers-Smalls did email us a response. And I would like her to address that now because there's a couple of things happening. We have one commissioner who brought up the idea of this fund balance and allocating funds, which was tabled for this meeting through board vote. But also what I would like the board to decide today as a body is whether we as a board want to take on this policy and its creation through policy or resolution, or however we want to move forward as an entire board, even after we hear from Dr. Myers. And then if we want to move forward, that we go through the formal process for policy and not, again, run it through this quickly when we don't run any other policy this way or a resolution or recommendation with very limited time and information. So Dr. Myers, I'm going to turn the gavel over to you so you can specifically address this piece. And then to my colleagues, I'll ask for your opinion and a vote officially after this.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So good evening, everyone, and thank you, Commissioner LeBron. So as you all know, and as the public knows, we have a fiscal fiscal plan from our state monitor, Dr. Jallo. And on page 20, it talks about the review, modification, and approval of the fund balance policy, and that needs to be accomplished by April 15th. So we provided a draft modified policy that would satisfy both the provisions of GASB 54 and Dr. Jallo's recommendation of annual fund balance increases. And if the board remembers, that was unanimously approved on. We went point by point in both the academic and the fiscal plan. So that was outlined in Dr. Jallo's plan. So we wanted to make sure that we are in compliance with moving forward as far as satisfying that. I know that Commissioner Powell did propose an alternative or a different policy. We suggested also to the board that if we wanted to just have conversations, that our recommendation is based on the state comptroller's office. We could have a conversation with our district's external auditors to get any independent guidance, recommendation, or technical review of the policy should our Board of Education desire. We recommended the particular recommendations to the policy, but please be assured that we will abide by whatever policy the board chooses to enact. We were giving our best take on that, given the input from the state comptroller's office and our external auditors. Harleen, I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted to add to that.
Other than the fact that
It's hard to hear,
I'm sorry. We also took in the definition as used by GFOA, and that was presented in the policy that we put forth. I think there may have been some confusion on that, but again, we are happy to listen and to act upon the direction of the board.
Mr. Clerk, I see your hand up.
Yes, I had a question, and actually it's regarding your recommendation, and it's a policy committee question. I know the policy committee is reviewing the policies of the board, and they're starting with special education and I think moving to finance.
Correct.
Now, following that schedule, would we still meet the timeline that was scheduled for us to implement the financial policy?
No, not where it's located in that timeline. That's a great question, Commissioner Clark.
So would the proposal be to move that policy up so that we can give it the due process as Commissioner LeBron indicated, but still meet that timeline?
Yes, and to have it go through the channel. Now, we've done some of that work already, but there's additional vetting that we need to do, or again, given my recommendation about conferring with the state comptroller or our external auditor, we certainly could make sure that's a part of this process as well.
Thanks.
Commissioner Powell?
Yeah, this piggybacks on Commissioner Clark's question. The timeline from the fiscal monitor's report asks us to review the policies. It does not insist that we change the policies. In fact, I haven't heard her recommend a specific change. Second point I want to make is that the existing policy specifically calls upon us to abide by the recommendations of the GFOA, right? Did I get those, that acronym in the right order? So essentially, so long as we're following those guidelines, then we will be in compliance with the existing policy. I'm not really all that concerned about meeting the fiscal monitor's timeline, because we're reviewing it right now by virtue of this conversation. Even if we make no changes at all, we're meeting that timeline just by having this conversation. If we decide that the existing policy is just fine, then then mission accomplished. The substantive difference between my proposal and the administration's is that I start with the language we already have and incorporate the definitions And I think I do it more succinctly than what has been done in the administration's draft.
Dr. Myers, do you want to respond to that?
If it's a matter of making it more succinct, Commissioner Powell, we can certainly do that, but I think it's a little more than that. So, I mean, I don't want to get into a back and forth, but I think it's definitely more than succinct, because I don't think we'd be at this point of the recommendations that I made if it was about succinctness.
Well, if my
Is succinctness a word? Succinctity? Being shorter. There you go.
if my would like, I can point to the very specific difference about how the fund balance is restored, and we can compare and contrast that. That's probably the meat and potatoes of this policy in any event. The administration version I can't manage all these devices all at once, so I can't pull everything up at the same time. Essentially says that in the event that we deplete the fund balance, that the funds be restored in no event more than over 2 years. Our existing policy says that we are to restore our fund balance at the rate of 1% per year, which means that in the end we will have restored to 5% in no more than 5 years. But let's give an example. If we only dipped into our fund balance by 1%, we would have it restored under existing policy in 1 year. If we completely eradicated our fund balance, we would have restored it in 5 years using the existing policy. I don't think that that is nearly the burden on our finances that a proposal to replace an entire 5% in 2 years. We don't receive enough in revenues that we can necessarily divert more than 1% per year to fund balance. And there's nothing wrong with a gradual increase. But that's probably the most significant difference between the two policies.
Right. I mean, it boils down to it's more about fiscal accountability and responsibility, but I would say it's more than just brevity, with all due respect.
Well, I agree with that. And when I said more succinctly, I was referring specifically to the definitions portion of it.
Understood. Thank you.
So what I just laid out was the most significant part of the policy proposal. So, you know, the question of how quickly do we restore fund balance, you know, I appreciate the recommendation. Your philosophy is one of restoring it as quickly as possible. And quite frankly, that can still be done under our policy where our existing policy where the 1% per year is our minimum threshold. If the administration feels that it can restore funds faster than that and makes that proposal in the budget presentation, there is nothing stopping us from doing that under the existing policy language.
Are you done, Commissioner Powell? Because President White has his hand up. President White?
Thank you. To either Commissioner Powell or Superintendent Myers-Small, I'm struggling with understanding the differences here. What are the issues? So in simplest terms, if you were just speaking to a constituent, a parent, what is the principal difference between what you are proposing, Commissioner Powell, and what is being written by Superintendent Myers, and vice versa? Superintendent Myers, what do you see if you were just speaking to a citizen, a parent, and trying to explain this? How would you describe the difference? Most of us aren't financial types here, and I'm getting a little bit lost in understanding why we are having this. And obviously there's a difference, and it's an important one, because I know Commissioner Powell was a financial person, wouldn't bring this up unless she thought it was, but I'm struggling with understanding the difference. Can somebody help me? One of you two?
President White,
Yes.
can I also go to our parent rep? She has her hands up, and then can administration respond to you after
Sure.
that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca?
Thank you. So the way that I'm interpreting it is that the new fund policy just sounds like it's more open and honest with the immediacy of repayment at the 5%, which I appreciate. The former policy really leaves it pretty wishy-washy, and this is something that I've been reading up on over the last couple of months. So I have a little more knowledge than most parents would, but that's the way it's being interpreted on this end. So if I am wrong, then please help me out. But the more financially you can show the general public that you're being open and honest and you're immediately repaying and refund and funding that fund balance so that we never have to go through these massive cuts again, and showing how we're doing that, I think is really helpful.
Carlene, if you'll get into the nuts and bolts, and then I can give the broad overview, but because you crafted it.
Sure. So actually, there was extensive research that was done before we brought the policy forward. And one of the things I believe that we're missing here is the GFOA definition has actually been updated. And so we incorporated the new language into the fund balance policy. And if it's acceptable to the board, we would very much like to bring forward to you the analysis that was performed. That will make it more visual, and it also be a very supportive document for you to have in your portfolio of tools, so that when you are asked by the public how the fund balance is calculated, it will actually give you a roadmap to be able to explain that. So is that a possibility that the board would entertain that we'd bring it forward at another meeting and share that calculation with you, as well as the updated definitions?
Well, I know this is scheduled to return, of course, as it naturally would, to the full board on Thursday. So this is really sort of a preparatory discussion. So absolutely, I mean, that could be helpful. Although I'd like to get as far as I can, at least me personally, in my understanding of the issues today. But yeah, absolutely, we could discuss that on Thursday too.
Commissioner Powell?
You're muted, Commissioner Powell. We can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you. I do want to respond to the parent, and I've got the two policies side by side now, so I can tell you that to the parent, her assessment that the current policy is more vague than the proposal, I strongly disagree with that statement. The current policy requires a minimum of 5% set aside, whereas the district's proposal is a minimum set aside of 4%. It in the replenishment paragraph, the district, again, it says if unassigned fund balance falls below the goal or has a deficiency, the district will reduce expenditures through cost-saving measures to the extent possible, if necessary, request city funds. And oops, that wasn't, in the case of restoring, it says, in instances where the district elects to utilize its fund balance, the district shall replenish the unassigned fund balance to its required level as soon as possible, but only after the district's current operational needs are met, and in no case more than 2 years subsequent to the fund balance was utilized. that's the proposal. That is far more vague than the existing guidelines, which call upon the replenishment of the fund balance at 1% per year.
Okay. So I want to give a couple of points. I don't know if anybody else has anything else. I don't want to go back and forth, but a couple of things. I want to grab the plan real quick because I have some notes in there. But the plan states that we're going to review the fund balance policy and modifications for approval by April 2021. So Mr. Clark, I know you mentioned we have this policy review, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. There are some policies that we must review. There are policies we must modify, even though the language may not say we have to create or have to change. Modification does mean that we have to review it and modify it so that it makes sense to this district and to this body. But I'm going to go back to my point originally, which was why this is not going through the policy process versus being spoken in this manner. And I know that there are some other policies that we are going to be discussing tonight for some either creations or changes, but I will be asking to take those out of this committee tonight and officially move them over as well to the policy process that this board as a body has agreed to have these smaller work groups with a smaller amount of commissioners and other administrations working together at the same time, which is great to review them so we can get through more of them in a more timely manner and meet the deadlines as well. So again, I go back to asking my colleagues here as a collective, if this is the process we want to have for this, or if we want to, as a board, say, let's move it into the policy process and go through the process we agreed to. The other piece is that I do want to support the administration on this. I don't, there's a lot of weeds I get into because I feel like I need to be in those weeds at times because they do have a bigger impact than most people may realize. But this is one of those that I think could have a potential real negative impact unintentionally if we are not fully aware of what we're actually voting on and deciding in this policy. And I do want to respect, Van, that you mentioned, I don't even know in layman's terms the differences of 1% versus 5%. And you know that I do my homework and research, and I don't know what that financial impact could be on a budget that's already strained. And I don't want to make that decision with lightly and not understanding what the implications could potentially be. I do recognize that Commissioner Powell was saying we're setting a tone and there's nothing stopping the administration. Well, this board will stop the administration. And so if we at least have a policy that and a middle ground that we can all agree on, they then at least can rest on the policy to make the decisions that they need to make, and so can we. So I do want to take a step back. But I'll do it at the will of this board and what you guys decide. And I also just want to call on Dr. Jallo, if she doesn't mind, to just give some clarity around some of the language you put in your plan around whether we do have to modify or change or create some policies, just for the record, if you don't mind, Dr. Jallo.
Sure, I was actually just reading it again because when I heard Commissioner Powell, I said, let me go back and read it again, but it does ask for modification and approval by April 2021. So there is a need. It's more than just reviewing the policy. It's bigger than that. And I think there's also been some changes to the GFAO, if I'm saying that correctly. So I think that needs to be brought into consideration as well. So it's a little bit more than just review. It's modification and approval. But you do have till April, but given the time it takes to modify and review and get input, you're still cutting it close for April date. So hopefully you won't delay this too much longer.
Does anybody else want to speak on it? I don't know what the will is of the board. I don't know if this requires a vote, Van. I'm looking to you to see how we move forward.
Would it be, can I ask another, would it be helpful to just have a model or an example of if this is our revenue, let's just say our revenue or our budget is based on 730 million, which is around where we are, what a 5% fund balance would look like versus a 1%. Do you think actually seeing the numbers and how that might impact either in a table or in some kind of graph, or would that be helpful in clarifying some of the questions that seem to be?
I think it will be for me. I see Commissioner Malloy shaking her head yes. Commissioner Adams is shaking his head yes. I don't know, Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, I see your hands up, so I'll let you go.
I think as a sample, I think Carlene, I'm not speaking for Carlene, of course, because she and I have done these different scenarios, but I think that it may not be an absolute number, but I think for you to see and have a range of what that might look like might help clarify your thinking around this issue.
Yeah, my thought process was maybe what we should do, even though we've kind of laid out the how we're going to tackle the policies, maybe we go back and we look at the policies, the shall policies that Dr. Jello has put before us, and move those, much further up in the order, so that we can get through those policies by the deadline, and then, move on to special education and the other policies that we have a priority on.
Kalia has her hand up, our board clerk. So I'm going to let her speak because I think she's trying to respond to what you just said, Mr. Clark, and then Commissioner Powell, it'll be your turn.
So yes, thank you, Commissioner LeBron. I did want to address that. That is the reason why they have been placed in the in the Finance Committee. When we went to do the policy update process, we recognized that the deadlines that are provided in the plans would not allow us to do both concurrently in Policy Committee. And so that's why they were pulled and placed on this agenda to align with the timelines. So that's the purpose of this. What would happen after that is that the Finance Committee would forward it out just as the Policy Committee would forward it out to the full board for voting and consideration. So for example, we do have additional policies that are slated to be discussed tonight, the purchasing policy, the budget policy, as well as the budget transfer policy. Those policies are technically ready right now because they have been reviewed by finance a couple of times. We have provided, we have received your feedback. We reviewed them in the preview financials meetings, and I have included them for tonight. Given that the board agrees on that, we would forward that out for the first reading or the first discussion item in the January 21st business meeting, and then we would do the second reading in the February, and then we could consider the policies and adopt them. I wouldn't say to move it back to policy because the full board is here. So moving it between committees doesn't really make much sense. That is why we didn't do it that way. But when we were committees of 4 or so, it did make sense to move from finance to policy, and then you have a double viewing of the policies that are fiscal and and policy, and then they go to the board. In this case, it would be forwarded out to the final board right now. The policy update committee is reviewing policies in chunks, and these special education policies are of high importance, and so those ones are slated first, of course, and we pulled the finance policies outside of that so it wouldn't impede the process.
Okay, thank you, Kalia. Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, I need clarification from Dr. Jallow about what modifications she believes that are needed. She cited the GFOA, but our current policy reads, the board intends to follow GFOA's recommended best practice and maintain a minimum unrestricted general fund balance of 5% of the district's general fund annual operating expenditures. Now, the GFOA continues to recommend a range, between 5 and 15%. And you actually have to look at the footnotes in the GFOA to find any deviation from that. They talk about kind of exceptions to the rule. So I'm looking at the existing policy and struggling to understand specifically where it falls short of her expectations. And I would remind all of us that the problem that we had that caused us to need a fiscal monitor wasn't in the contents of our policy. What caused us to get in trouble was, number one, the misrepresentation of our current state and of budget estimates. But number two, the board explicitly giving approval in that budget process to drift away from the stated policy. Our stated policy calls on us to replenish the fund balance over consecutive years. We explicitly, in 2 consecutive budget years, agreed to take money out of the fund balance rather than restoring from the previous year's rating of the fund balance. So it wasn't the policy that was at fault. It was the decision making outside of the policy, or if you will, in violation of the policy.
Carlene, I see you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to assist here with that. The GFOA's original 5 to 15% recommendation has since been replaced, updated, however you want to state it. It now reads that it's a minimum of 2 months operating revenue or 2 months of expenditures. So the policy, as it's formally being quoted, does reflect the former GFOA definition. What we used was the new definition. It would be our recommendation to base it upon 2 months of operating expenditures, just given where we are these days with regard to revenue. So it would be safer to go the route of expenditures. I'm hoping that helps. And again, we're very happy to bring it forward in a visual to show how this would all come together.
Yeah, so I just want to add, I personally do prefer the recommendation that Dr. Jallow and that you are offering to bring a visual for some clarity so we have some understanding. You know, the other piece I want to uplift is that the administration and our state auditors and the GFO, like, this is their recommendations, and then we have one commissioner saying, I have my own recommendations, and the board as a body is not agreeing to this. And so we're spending a lot of time having these conversations on which way we should vote. But personally, I'm going to go with the folks who are the experts and work in the finance, whether it's here in the district or the state comptroller's office. And that's where I'm going to vote on. However, I do think for the rest of my colleagues and for myself too, openly and admittedly, because I don't know off the top of my head what 2 months of our savings would be in comparison to a 5 to 15% ranges or a 4% rate. I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. I can calculate them, and it's going to take me a little bit of time. But if you guys are willing to do that work and present us with some visuals, I personally 100% agree that we go that route. And Kalia, I hear what you're saying. We are a board of a whole here, so there's no reason to kick it back through the process for policy that we agree to. And I'm okay with that too. But I think potentially next steps, and maybe this could happen next Tuesday before the regular meeting, is that this is presented, President White, as an agenda item with some visuals provided to the board beforehand so that we have time to review it, of what different percentages would look like, and also what the state recommendation of 2 months worth. Because I do think 2 months worth is going to be a vastly different percentage number for the districts if it's based on your entire budget size. So I don't know if anybody wants to support that for next week, but this is the time to have the conversation. Commissioner Powell.
Yeah, 2 months of operating expenses. This, I'm getting kind of frustrated because this conversation is now feeling very disingenuous. 2 out of 12 is 16%. Where do we come up with a minimum of 4% if the GFOA recommendation, 2 months of operating expenses works out to 16%? I mean, yes, there were changes in the GFOA language, but fundamentally, it hasn't changed. The very bones of their recommendation has not changed. Let's suppose we were operating on a 10-month schedule, because that's how we spend most of our money. 2 months out of 10 is 20%, which is way out of line with what is being recommended. The suggestion that the point I'm trying to make is that the existing policy, and because I don't really offer a change to that, my alternative proposal, which kind of merges existing policy with the administration's proposal, is more conservative than the administration's proposal. And the accounting principle of conservatism says that you take the most conservative course of action you possibly can. The original policy we have was devised, was written, I believe, by Vern Connors back when he was our budget director and acting CFO. And it's a very sound, very stable document. And you should, you don't have to look at my policy proposal. I offered some changes because I took what I thought was the best of the administration's proposal and integrated it. But you should seriously consider watering it down, because I think that is what the administration proposals does, is it sets less aside in fund balance than we currently require. And I don't think that's conservative practice.
I don't know if any other of my colleagues have anything additional to add, but again, I go back to supporting.
Amy's hand up.
My hand is.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Malloy, go ahead.
Thank you. First and foremost, I appreciate and I want to uplift the concerns that Commissioner Powell has brought to the table. And I also want to make sure that I understand what her concerns are to the full extent. I also want to appreciate and uplift, however, the proposal that the superintendent has brought to us as well. And I'm trying to reconcile those differences. And, you know, this is not my area of expertise. And without being an expert on any of these accounting principles, it's really hard for me to reconcile, you know, what we agreed to in terms of timeline with the fiscal monitors report versus the recommendations set forth by administration and our external auditors, and then the proposal by Commissioner Powell. It's just difficult for me to understand all of that. And what I want to understand is, as Carlene has brought to the table, you know, giving us those definitions of the GFOA, just providing more clarity around that, I think would be extremely helpful for me. I need to see the numbers in front of me. I'm a very visual person. So I need to know exactly what this entails, and I need to be able to see the differences between proposals. So I just need clarification. I need it all spelled out in layman's terms prior to making a decision. I think this needs to be a priority item. We don't want to kick this down the road. We need to follow or adhere to what our fiscal monitor has recommended. But I need more clarification. So that's where I stand. But at the same time, I think that we've got to find a happy ground and be able to reconcile these.
Thank you. So I don't know, President White, how do I move forward from this topic? Because I do agree with getting some visuals, but also understanding if we went this route, what the financial implication will be on our overall budget versus going this route, you know, what options we have. And personally, I want to uplift what Commissioner Malloy just said, which is having an understanding in greater detail, right, of like what's recommended, what's being recommended here, and again, what that impact's going to be. I think that will help all of us make a better informed decision.
Sure, I appreciate the recognition that this has to be maybe scheduled out a little bit, because I think what everybody seems to want is some additional clarity. So, Madam Clerk, if I'm correct, we have a meeting Thursday, right?
Yes, we have a business meeting on Thursday, and then we have an HR and CIGR committee of the whole on Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Yes, so there is a special meeting section at the head of that week.
Sure. So I would think, and Leslie, you correct me, you and your staff correct me if I'm wrong, it probably would be better if we put this off for Tuesday to provide that additional clarity that people are talking about. And that, of course, would meet within the time frame that we have to meet with the, comply with the monitor's time frame, correct? Right? If we did this Tuesday, that would be plenty of time, right? So unless there's some objection, if you don't mind, Commissioner LeBron, I'll just take the gavel back just for a second. And is there any objection to us discussing this on Tuesday with the hope that the administration and Commissioner Powell, if she chose to do so, provide some additional clarity around this so that we all, Commissioner Malloy, you're saying what I felt. I think I even heard Commissioner LeBron, who has some expertise in this area, want some additional clarity. Commissioner Powell, certainly you have no objection to that. So unless there's some objection, we'll have additional presentation on Tuesday. Commissioner Powell offers up some numbers with respect to what the 20% might look like. But let's get some confirmation from everybody else and so that we can all be comfortable about where we're at to make the decision. I think Commissioner LeBron correctly said earlier on, this is a policy that we're reviewing. And of course, the board as a whole has to approve the change in the policy. Steve, is it 2/3 if it's a change in policy?
That's
for bylaws.
That's for bylaws. Okay, yeah.
By resolution, you can adopt a new policy by majority vote.
Thank you, Steve. So Tuesday, Madam Clerk, you were raising your hand? Yep.
Yes, I also wanted to find out regarding the two policies that were tabled that have 578 and 579 that have to do with the fund balance reserves. Are you tabling that as well to Tuesday or to Thursday?
I see Commissioner LeBron sort of nodding her head. I think is that right? Did I see you nodding your head, Commissioner LeBron?
That was nodding my head. I just want them tabled, but then I just want to also add administration, if we can get something potentially by Friday, so we at least have the time to review it. If that's possible, Carlene and.
So yes, the answer to that, Madam Clerk, is yes, all those things would be tabled. We'll have to have a motion to lift them from the table, and then a date certain would be next Tuesday. Can I, unless there's some objection, I need to have that motion?
I'm happy to make that motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. All those in favor of tabling those two additional resolutions?
Are you lifting from the table?
Yes, it's a consolidated motion. Thank you.
Okay.
We are lifting from the table and again, putting them back on the table. That is resolutions 578 and 579 to next Tuesday. What's the date on that?
That is the 26th.
All right, that was Commissioner Powell and Commissioner LeBron's joint motion. As there, all those in favor of tabling resolutions 578 and 579 as described by the clerk indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And again, I think Commissioner LeBron has made a good suggestion. If the administration could prepare its detailed clarity by Friday, that would be extremely helpful. And Commissioner Powell, if you have any response to that, it'd be helpful if you could get it to us by Sunday or something like that, so that we would all have a chance to, because let's be clear about this. When we pick this off the table on Tuesday, we will be deciding as a board what's going to happen. There won't be any additional time to have additional adjournments and conversations about it. All right, Commissioner LeBron, I'm turning the gavel back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Kalia, can you let me know where we're at on the agenda, because we moved some stuff
Yeah,
around.
we moved some stuff around.
We did, and I printed the first one, so.
Yes. Okay, so just we are finishing up the discussion on policies. If you want to, at this time, we have the three other policies. If you just want to I don't know if the rest of the board wants to do this, but if we want to forward out of the finance committee at this time, because all those changes have been made unless there are additional input to those 3 policies.
So this is for clarification for everybody, the purchasing policy, which is 6,700, the budget policy, which is 61,110, and the new budget transfer policy, which is 6150. Are those the 3 that we're going to ask to move out? I do want to just talk about the purchasing policy and something that Commissioner Elliott actually highlighted and have this discussion here. So in that policy, there was a line about correctional facility purchasing. And what we've come to discover, Commissioner Elliott, and I want to put this out there because I also want us as a board to consider writing to our state legislators about this law, is that we are essentially encouraged, but also required to spend some dollars purchasing through correction facilities. And this is that are owned by New York State. And so, you know, when we all heard this and pre-finance, first thing everyone was discussing was like the school to prison pipeline. Like, here is a direct potential correlation on how we're supporting this. And we, you know, our purchasing folks that they try very hard every year to not use any dollars intentionally for the district, but it is a law in New York State. And so that's why it's in our policy written the way that it's written, because they just took it right out of the law and stuck it into the policy many years ago. We have the ability to remove that from our policy, but furthermore, we have the ability as a board to plead to our state legislators to look at this law on their books and ask them to change this policy for all school districts across New York State. And I would like us as a school board to take that fight on. I don't know if, Commissioner Elliott.
I'd just like to thank you for bringing that up, because I did review it again. And every time I look at that, you know, I cringe, because that's what's known as slave labor. And they're not getting paid prevailing wages or anything like that. And it just, you know, it just supports, you know, a population or an entity that is not aligned with our community, nor with our core values here at the Rochester City School District. And so I would wholeheartedly support, you know, some legislative writing campaign or visits in order to discuss that for the entire state. We should not be purchasing goods and services from a prison, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in on this? Okay. So do I motion to take out of finance and move over for first discussions?
Yes.
So can I get that motion now?
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, and now you have the minutes, and then we can go as.
Now we're going back to the original agenda, so that our vice president and president wanted to be here, but both have to leave at some point and hopefully may come back, but they really wanted to be here, part of policy conversations. So I don't even know if we updated the agenda on board docs, but this is why there was a little bit of a flip. So can I get a motion for the minutes for the December 15th Financial Committee of the Whole?
Motion.
Second.
Talia, whoever you heard first, because I heard 4 people. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those pass. And Vice President and President, since you guys are both still here, I'm going to give you guys the option to either have our CFO go into her review and discussion, or if you want to be here for the finance resolutions review. I know you got to get going soon, but
I've got at least 20 minutes.
Personally, I'd like to hear the financial report from our chief financial officer. That's just me.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think it'll be important and good for both of you to be here for those conversations.
Yep.
Kali, if you don't mind, I'm sorry. And I'm sorry to the community, I changed the agenda, but I want to give
Thank you.
folks the option to being a part of the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I will bring up the financial report right now. Do you want to do the presentation first or the report, Carlene?
Probably the report first and then the presentation.
Okay, no problem.
That's
One second.
acceptable. Okay.
Thank you both for your flexibility and
No problem. And please know, I fully understand that we have a very full agenda this evening, so we will be moving right along. So if you do have questions, just please jump in at any time and we will take those as we go along this evening, if that's okay.
My apologies, it's just loading right now.
Not a problem.
Okay, I'm actually going to take this directly off of Board Docs because it seems to be loading a lot faster. Just a reminder to the public that you can view all these documents on the Board Docs if you go to the district's website. Bring that up right now. Okay.
Okay, and just to get started, as we typically do, I like to go right to the cash flow projection. And again, if anybody has any questions on anything that I may be skipping over this evening, please feel free to ask. But if you go to page number 4 is where we will begin with the cash flow. And again, as we talked about last time, we will look at the current month that we're reviewing. So that would be December. December is now closed, so that will be the actual. And again, what we're taking a look there is what has transpired over the previous month, and then also how we did compared to a year ago. And I realized this morning as I was going through this again, I should have made it a little bit easier once again and just highlighted the columns and the numbers to focus in on. So I apologize for that. Didn't think about it until later. I know that that was asked at the last meeting, and I apologize. So what you're looking at is that there is approximately a $10 million reduction in from November to December. Part of that reason, as we talked a little bit about it, we touched upon it last month, was the fact that there was an extra pay. I know this question was brought up, but there was an extra pay with payroll. So you see an increase, so down underneath the accounts payable and then payroll section, you're going to see that there is a significant increase in payroll. And again, it's not because of payroll increasing with us coming back to school, because obviously that has not yet happened in December. But what it is that there was an extra pay period in that month. So I would like to also say it was recognized, and even though we spoke about it in November, but now it became reality in December when we had actually talked about the fact that our charter school monies, the aid going to the charter school, so up in the revenue section again, but the money that is be given to us to actually help assist with charter school payments was actually withheld by 20%. So there was a reduction of $871,000 in that money. It's important to note though that even though the money was held back from aid, we are fully expected to pay our full share to the charter schools, and that was done in January. So it puts us behind the 8 ball, so to speak, because once again, the money was withheld, but we are obligated under law to make the full payment to the charter schools. The other difference that you're seeing in December, again, up under revenues and in that column in the line, of grant receipts, that number does represent the 14.5 million that did come in for the UPK grant. So we are grateful to have that. Again, falling short, but we are certainly grateful for whatever we do receive. I would like to point out, and I'm sure it's a hot topic this evening for discussion, we do not have any projection yet, even on the 2021 CARES money as far as when we'll receive it. It is currently within our cash flow projected in February, but we don't have any word from the state as to when that money will actually be received. Callie, if you go to page 5 and 6 now, again, I just like to bring it forward to the board that this is the cash flow, the liquid cash flow, using a 5% reduction in state aid. Again, very real. We could fully even anticipate seeing the 20% reduction. There is no one that's saying that that cannot come to fruition. There has been talk, and I know we mentioned this again at the last Finance Committee meeting, that 20% could actually be withheld in the final payment that is going to be made to the district in state aid. So again, this graph is showing, the blue line is showing the actual where we stand with our cash flow, and then the red line would show that if the RAN was removed from the district by the city, the red line would show what our liquid cash flow or deficit would look like at that point in time. So again, page 5 and 6, page 5 shows 5% reduction, and page 6 is showing the 20% reduction. If we now move to page number 7, and all of a sudden my dog is deciding to be very vocal. I apologize for that. But if you move to page 7 on the revenue summary.
Commissioner LeBron? Commissioner LeBron? Can you hear me?
Yep,
yeah, I'm sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted to say to Carlene, I really like that graph. That made a lot of sense to me, you know, above the line and below the line, the blue and the red. I just wanted to note that was really provided some clarity that you can get sort of lost in the numbers, but I apologize, Commissioner LeBron. Sorry, Carlene, that was
No,
just
it's okay.
It's
I
very,
thought you were
very,
going to ask me to mute because I heard a dog and I was going to say I'm not hosting, but.
No. I really like that chart. Have you used that before, Carlene?
We have actually, and again, anytime that we can show anything by visuals, we're happy to do that for you. So,
very helpful. Thank you.
I'm glad to know. Okay, and moving on to the revenue summary. We are looking at, again, this is page number 7 for those that are following along. And if you scroll down, you're going to see that there was a variance within the revenue, and it's a good variance, positive variance. It was up by 6.3 million. And so the column that is actually entitled adopted versus estimated, that's where you're actually going to see what composed that $6.3 million increase. Most noteworthy there, one of the items is a prior period adjustment for workman's compensation. And that was a result of the state changing their methodology with regard to how payments are being made. So it was certainly, even though this money was due to us in 1920, we will absolutely take it with open arms in 2021 as it helps us with our cash flow and our revenue position. Other adjustments within that column are spelled out. If there are specific questions, I'm happy to provide the details that I can. As we move on to page number 10 in the appropriation status report, what you're going to see is once we get there, there's going to be underneath the unemployment insurance, a $1.3 million negative showing here in this particular line item. We are watching that very closely with the projections that were made by our new director of budget, and he was looking into this and working with HCI. We believe that our obligation for this year is actually going to be increasing to 3.6 million. So this is a case where, and one of the things we'll be getting into here later, it will be discussing budget transfers and the movement of money. We will have to find the difference to make sure that that obligation is covered. As you may recall, in the fund balance proposal that was put forth, there was monies that we wanted to put aside and requested to have put aside for unemployment insurance, especially since we are self-funded. The very last thing within the financial report that I'd like to bring to your attention this evening starts on page number 13. And as a requirement, underneath the state monitor's financial plan, we are now obligated to bring forward to you budget transfers. So I would like to bring it to your attention. At the top of this report, it's saying that these are budget transfers for the period of December 1st to December 31st. So this is an all-inclusive report of all of the budget transfers for all of the funds that have been made for that period of time. The red numbers, the negative numbers, those in parentheses, are the amounts that have been moved out of that particular code and placed into another code. So in the top one there, you're seeing there was a movement from the salaries of custodial subs to custodial supplies. And again, just guesstimating as to what that might be, it most likely was to cover additional PPE, I would guess, and disinfectant type products. So again, this was just one transaction. But as you scroll down through there, as we move forward, this is where the budget transfer policy will actually kick in. This is a recommendation underneath recommendation number 17, I should say, the state monitor's plan. And as we move forward, we will be looking at the codes and to make sure that we're properly budgeting our codes moving forward. So you'll see less budget transfers in the new budget year under 21-22 budget year, because we'll be placing money in the necessary codes because there will be history here showing where the money is moving from and to. I don't know if anyone has any questions with regard to that, but I'm happy to take that. One more last thing I do want to say with regard to budget transfers, I forgot to say, is that just because the money's been moved does not mean it's been expended at that point in time. It's being placed into the code in anticipation of an expenditure occurring.
Carlene, can you showed something that showed $500,000, a little over $500,000 dollars being moved. I think it said 560. I thought it said 563. Could you explain that?
Okay, I don't know the specific one, but
It was the whatever you just showed, whatever table you just had up.
Holly, do you know if it's page 13? I'm not sure.
Keep coming down. It was okay right there. 563 in red.
Okay, so can you go back up, Kelly, one, please?
Okay.
Just click it up one page to 13, page 13.
Yeah,
is it on the bottom?
What might explain that?
Okay. Okay. So what this is that it's actually taking money out of a teacher's salary. This would be an hourly code, and it's actually moving it into a substitute code or various substitute codes. Actually, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. It moved it from one teacher salary code to another teacher salary code. So it's going from student equity and placement over to program efficiencies. So that's just a movement within, it's the same line item, the same type of expenditure. And so typically when this type of thing happens, it's because of that true up that we go through where we use average salaries. And then once the calculations are actually performed, it moves it into the proper department that needs those salaries. So it's called a true up. They move the money from where they had originally had it budgeted to where the money is actually needed.
And taking follow-up questions?
Can I just ask one other follow-up on that one? Is that the same true for the following entries? Same type of explanation?
No, so the following entries, if you scroll further down, Alia, please and thank you. What's going to happen is that the way we practice right now is that we have a centralized district code for substitutes. And so that means that all of the money is located in one all-inclusive code. And then as it becomes known as to where the codes will actually, where the money will be utilized, that money is then transferred into all of the individual buildings. This is something that we are, I'm sorry?
So I just want to be clear. I'm just looking at Montgomery and I'm just picking out a school. I don't know, I'm not picking on that school, but where it says number 50. So does that mean that $43,000 was spent on subs at Montgomery Elementary School?
No, it means $43,000 has been put into the code at Montgomery School. So again, based upon analysis that was performed by budget department, they were estimating, projecting that based on current need of that building, They're placing $43,000 into the substitute code in the Montgomery Elementary School so that it's there ready when we do come back into session.
So how do they know they're going to need 43,000 and the other person knows they're going to need 9,000 in subs? How do you know you're going to need that exact amount before you have the need?
Yeah, it's an estimate. What they're trying to do is just get the money settled now before we go back into session, so to speak, with the children coming back onto school. So it's in anticipation of the usage as we move forward, based on current trends.
I'm gonna stop asking, but I'll ask privately because I have a lot of questions about that. But I'll save it privately. Thank you.
Certainly.
And
please know.
I'm sorry, Carlene. Rebecca has her hand up too. I'm going to call on her and then Commissioner Powell, and then if you want to respond to.
I think this question is similar to what Dr. Jallo was talking about. And when we first saw these numbers during the preview meeting, it started a conversation about what is the plan for substitutes as the kids go back into classrooms, because you have some districts that they cancel school if the teacher's sick and the kids don't come into school. But as opposed to this situation where you have one school that has budgeted $100, 53 school isn't even on the list. And then you have other schools like James Monroe Lower School with $108,000 budgeted for substitute teachers. And when we know that that was one of the biggest issues of under budgeting in previous years, what like where are we on this? So thank you.
My turn.
Dr. Jallo, I'm sorry, not Dr. Jallo, Dr. Myers, I see you mouthing something. Are you trying to respond?
Yes, thank you. I've got to get used to mute and unmute tonight.
Yeah, and then I'm sorry, Commissioner Powell, you'll go after Dr. Myers.
I was going to ask if one of my chief of schools would respond to that question, because we did talk that through Ms. Hetherington. So I want it to be clear. I think I saw some of them on. Shirley or Carmine or Sheila, would you respond?
Good evening, commissioners. So for substitutes allocations this year, we have put a process in place for when a sub could be called. A sub is called for when there are 3 or more days of a teacher absence. And then we bring a sub in just because of the transition in the remote setting. I think some of these monies, and I don't want to speak for Carlene, some of the monies here are for long-term vacancies, long-term subs, where teachers are out. So that's our sub process we currently have in place.
My turn?
I'm sorry, yes, Commissioner Powell, yes, and then I'll ask my question after that.
Okay, so I need to go back. I need to cover 2 points. The first is just fundamentally the idea of a transfer in anticipation of future needs. Isn't that exactly the concern that I forgot the guy's name from rural schools that did an analysis of our financial activity? Isn't that exactly the problem that he pointed out, where we're transferring in anticipation and then we transfer back and then we change the numbers? I mean, I'm glad to see this report because it kind of highlights just how frequently we tamper with these dollar values and move them from fund to fund. But is there a better way than doing this in anticipation of opening? We don't know for a fact we need these subs, do we? Unless they are long-term subs. That's question number 1, and I'll save my number 2.
Okay, so with regard to being long-term or short-term sub, my department does not see that information. I know I believe Chris is on the line tonight, and he would be able to speak to that. So if there are absolutely long-term subs that are needed in these buildings, and that's where it could be that something like that's happening with James Monroe, that they know someone's going to be out for a period of time, then the money is placed into the code. The one thing I would like you to know is that, yes, there is absolutely a better way of budgeting. And yes, we are moving forward with those practices for 21-22 budget year. This is a budget that we have collectively adopted, and we're trying to work through it the best way that we can at this point in time. And it's important to know that once the money is placed in the code, no one else has access to this money for transfers without going through us. So it cannot be expended without us knowing, meaning what it's going to be expended on. So HCI has their process. They have, they review utilization reports, and they also have individuals within their department that takes a look at who is using the substitutes and how they're being used. So Chris, did you want to jump in?
Sure. Good evening, commissioners. I think one of the issues is that when we talk about the substitute budget, what we're talking about is this big overarching umbrella of expenses that isn't, when we talk about substitutes, most of us think about a teacher calling in sick and a substitute needs to come in to fill in for her. Through December 23rd, we had 0 expenses in that day-to-day substitute teaching line. Since we've reopened back up in January, we may see some of those real expenses, but through December we had 0. What you're seeing here and what the majority of our current sub expenses have been on real vacancies. So we started the school year in September, and we knew that we were unable to hire, let's just say, a bilingual special education teacher. We may have filled that position with someone, and they are now charged against the sub budget. So when you look at the total sub budget and what you're seeing here, it's likely going to be for people that are on real vacancies that we were unable to find a person to hire onto. That's where the dollars are.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Powell, you having a follow-up?
Yeah, didn't even get to the question too. That would certainly be a more satisfactory answer if that is in fact the case. But we were told just a few minutes ago that these were estimates, and that was what concerned me. I just remembered his name, Rick Timms. It was Rick Timms's report that said there were just an extraordinary number of transfers. And if we were transferring based on estimates, that would lead ultimately to reversals of those transactions, even though, the people on the ground can't do it. Sooner or later, if the estimate was wrong, then money gets moved back and moved again. So let me say it this way. I prefer the answer that I just got, that it's based on real substitutes filling in for teachers in a known environment. My second question was page 13 of 30. It was Dr. Jallo's question. The large $500,000 transaction is moving, and the note says move registrars, and it from student equity and placement to program efficiencies. And the truth is that doesn't offer me any clarity. I don't understand why program efficiencies needs $500,000 in presumptively registrars that used to be assigned to student equity. Can somebody drill down for me on that?
I absolutely do know why that is. And it's because program efficiencies is a brand new department that was just created this year. So that's what that department is now called. And it was pulled out of where it was formerly placed, a former department, which was previously called Student Equity and Placement. So this was a request that was put forth by administration with absolute approval. And so it was a creation of a new department, and that's the registrars. So it would be the salaries for the registrars in that area, and it's classified as a teacher salary.
And that's supported by our budget? I mean, did we do a budget amendment to shift the funds from student equity to program efficiencies?
No, there's no dollar amount change. It's just it's the creation of a brand new department. So this is the transaction that would allow that to occur. You wouldn't need it to do a budget amendment. You're doing a budget transfer.
Commissioner Powell, I just want to add, we actually don't formally have yet a budget transfer policy. That is one of the policies that I recommended that this board create, kind of for this concerns that you're sharing now, right? Like if we were not viewing this right now, and I'm not saying this administration, but we have had the experience of previous administration potentially not highlighting this for this board, and sharing that information, we would not know that a large sum of money was transferred from one item to the other. In this case, I think our CFO is saying that the department was either renamed and just recategorized, so the money was just moving equally. But in the past, we have had the experience of large sums being moved from one budget item line to another that was approved by the board through a budget process. And we did not know, again, because we don't formally have at this time a budget transfer policy, but we will. Just want to put that out there. Dr. Jallo?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hop on this substitute piece, but if all these projected numbers are for substitutes, then I think there should be a column there saying just how many substitutes or vacancies are at each of these schools. So we have some idea of what that dollar amount equates to. So what does $100 buy you at a school in anticipation of a substitute? I don't know what that would be. And also I wonder, because high schools are not in session, haven't been in session, and won't be in session for over more than a month away. So how are they anticipating substitutes in December for a start in February? So I just think it needs further data documentation to understand what all these amounts. And I have to really impress upon the need for that, because this has been an area that the district has been cited for many, many years. If we can get some more information about what those dollar amounts mean in terms of the vacancies that are at those buildings, I think that would help clarify what we're looking at as it relates to this section on substitutes.
Absolutely. And I know Chris had done a great presentation, and I'm sure we can
So
do
for me,
something like
I don't
that
need
again
another
going
presentation.
forward.
No disrespect. We don't need another presentation. Just for me, what I'm requesting is just a chart. If Forbes Elementary has 7,300 that they anticipate they're going to need in subs, then tell me how many vacancies are currently at Forbes Elementary. So that's just another column on this chart, actually. It doesn't have to be a big to do for me, at least.
So I do want to support that, Dr. Jallo, but also add, I personally would be interested in understanding the classifications for the teachers that are missing. So is it math? Is it ELA? Is it language? And compare that to our actual cuts. Because when I first saw this in previews, I was trying to also understand how we've had a large amount of cuts, and then we're paying these exorbitant amounts on long-term subs. And I do understand the difference between a day one sub, and some of the conversation that my colleagues were not a part of is that we have a tier system for our long-term sub. So if they're here for a certain number of days, they're paid a per diem rate daily. I believe it starts at 125. But don't quote me, because I have some old data from my own personal experience, but it does go up to different tiers the longer that long-term sub is here. So it is a different monetary budgeting amount. If a sub is here for 6 months versus a sub that's here for 30 days, covering just a quick shortage. But again, I would need to understand if we're doing layoffs and then we're hiring these subs and then they fall into a higher tier. I just need to understand what positions these subs are filling, and if there's any correlation with the number of people that we've laid off or the positions that we've laid off. And if there's some correlations there, how do we address that? Dr. Jallo.
I'm good. I'm in agreement.
Oh, okay.
Definitely, these numbers need more unpacking. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, I don't see anyone else's hand, so Carlene, you can continue if you'd like.
That's actually all I had for the financial report. So
Okay.
if you'd like
Could
to.
I just ask a really quick question? I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Rebecca.
I don't think I got an answer on what the substitute policy is going to be with in-person learning for going back in February. If I could bug you for that.
I don't have that information, but I know Chris could step in again.
You mean the process? I don't know if we have a policy per se.
Don't have a policy.
Yeah, but maybe the process or how schools are going to be able to utilize subs or
So
call them in.
the concern is if you're pulling in district subs into a school that has, I mean, every school it sounds like is going to have a different protocol. So how are subs going to be assigned so that there's enough people that know what they're walking into? I mean, I can't imagine being a substitute teacher walking into a school that you haven't been in 18 months and you're expected to teach in person and remote learning students, and you just found out that you needed to do this at 6 o'clock in the morning. And that's why I mentioned other districts are, when a teacher calls out or a teacher is ill, they're canceling school and students stay remote for that day, which would be incredibly difficult for childcare and parenting and that kind of thing. So I was wondering if that had been addressed, and seeing the numbers for substitutes kind of triggered that, not really knowing as a parent what to expect.
Chris, would you respond?
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly speak to the first part of your question. One of the things that we did was we actually had a full day of professional development and really safety training for our substitutes prior to in-person teaching and learning starting back up again recently. And so we did have about 200 substitutes participate in that. And so they have received training and safety precaution training through our health services. And we also had principals and others involved in helping to ensure the training for that session was really connected well to schools and the needs that our substitutes might have. Relative to the second part of your question, you know, I'm not aware of other districts, if somebody calls in sick, that they have the class be remote, but that's not something that we're doing.
Okay, Rebecca, are you good? Okay. All right. Carlene, I think we have your presentation next.
Okay. All right, so as we've done in months past, where we start is with the current budget, and then we actually tonight we'll be taking a look as we move forward into the 21-22 budget, just to kind of kick off the season there. But if we could move forward, please. What I would like to show or say with regard to slide number 3 is that this slide is showing us again, or reminding us that back in November, we did do a budget adjustment during a November meeting, and that adjustment was, or amendment I should say, was for 18.9 million, and it was resolution number 497. And so again, that was to take care of those expenditures that were underestimated and revenues that were overestimated. And then that coupled with the reductions that were put forth by individuals within the central office who had come forward with their reductions at the request of the superintendent, we were able to make up some ground in covering the differences that were discovered back in that period of time. I also want to say too that it's important to note that we haven't mentioned it, but East had also put forth a measure of reducing their expenditures too at the same time. And what that was that they had actually implemented a budget freeze early on in the school year, and they were not spending money unless it was absolutely necessary. So I just wanted to put that out there. If you move to slide number 4, so then this will actually show where we did achieve a balanced budget on November 30th, and I really wanted to bring attention to that at this meeting. It's important to know that because there's a lot of hard work that went into that in trying to get the balance, the budget balance at that point in time. And so now if we move forward on to the next slide, please. What we've done since that, oops, go, yeah, back one, please. I'm sorry. If we just pick up where we've left off now in November, for the month of December, we have enacted our budget freeze, and we've been talking about that in the recent past at other presentations that we have given. And what that means is that as of December 31st, we enacted a budget freeze whereby now all expenditures throughout the district cannot be approved as a requisition in PeopleSoft without the approval of the chief. So again, any requisition that's put forward after December 31st needs the approval of a chief in order to be authorized to move forward for payment. Then, if you may recall in the financial plan as put forth by the state monitor, recommendations 7 and 8 have stated clearly that on February 15th, all spending now will cease. So the strategy for here on out with regard to the 2021 budget is just to keep that deficit and just keep the deficit out of the way, just to maintain a balanced budget here throughout the rest of the year and hopefully end the year in a positive position. No spending will occur after February 15th unless it's absolutely urgent. And again, that will require my approval or that of the superintendent's. People may say, why are you taking such a conservative approach? And the reason being is that, again, the 20% reduction in state aid still is looming out there, that it's a very real possibility. And we have already recognized, as stated previously this evening, the reduction in our grants awards coming through, as well as the fact that we are seeing other aids reduced, such as charter school aid, and we still have no indication as to when our CARES money for 2021 will be received. So again, we have to be frugal with our spending. We have to remain disciplined and stay the course. At the February Finance Committee meeting, we will start our projection out of fund balance for you. From there forward, you will have a meeting by meeting update on our fund balance and allowing you to start to see what the end of the year looks like. So now as we move into the 21-22 budget season and fully engaged in that season, just as we have stated in the past, we are facing an opening of that budget season at a deficit of $47 million. And so we do need to cut that deficit, and we are looking for ways to reduce, actually to reduce by 50 million and have the 21-22 budget be $50 million less than the 2021 budget. If we go to slide number 7, please. So this evening we are actually awaiting the governor's state aid runs. We just received, I received a text message just a little while ago that the runs are expected to be released this evening instead of tomorrow. As soon as those runs are released, we will be taking a look at them and determining what our revenue will be looking like as a more precise picture as we enter into this 21-22 budget season. The other thing that we will have to make a decision upon once those numbers are received is what the amount will be that we will be seeking from the city with regard to our RAN. And so we need to turn that around very quickly. The city has let us know that they would very much appreciate an answer, preferably by tomorrow, with regard to what that request would look like. And that is it for my presentation this evening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain those.
I do, but I'm gonna open the floor to my colleagues to see if they have any questions first. No questions? Carlene, well, first and foremost, for the city to request for us to give them our guesstimate of our RAND by tomorrow, when the governor's dropping some estimate of numbers tonight, because I watched his budget presentation today. And although I appreciate how charismatic he can be as a presenter, he did not give us any indication as to what that actually means in terms of numbers for us. He did say, you know, he's asking the federal to give us 4% of the $350 billion that they have put aside for CARES Act. But again, that is not a concrete number for us. I also don't understand if the city has the same understanding that we all do, that we are getting some guesstimate estimates, even from the state tonight, because I think the governor was clear one thing, he's going to give us some estimates and then push for federal to give the money that the state needs. But that if we don't get that, then he's back to the drawing board to make some additional cuts. And we certainly were listed, not just RCSD, but public education in the state of New York was listed as one of those points that would potentially get cut, along with Medicaid and other services. So, you know, I don't know how we can advocate within the city to have that understanding that we are operating on an estimated budget, even from the governor right now, and that those runs are just really rough drafts, if you will, until the state gets a signal from federal and that trickles down to us. We don't know. I mean, I'm sure that you can have a guesstimate, but we should not be operating that way. We literally have been hard on ourselves about operating in estimations. We certainly should not be doing that with the city and borrowing money that way. So that's all I want to say. Hopefully we get some more clarity in the weeks to come from both federal and state, and we're not cut any further. And I do want to acknowledge that the governor himself also acknowledged a 5% reduction so far in his presentation to school districts across New York State. So I don't know if anybody else has anything, or if you want to add anything to that. No, okay, we can move on. So I'm going to move on to resolutions, but we do have a professional development training today on Title I. But before I move on to the resolutions, I'll take questions if anybody has them for this meeting. I do want to, I don't know if Marisol is on, if she wants to jump on, but I will share that you may have noticed that you have additional resolutions this month. And that is because we are in the process of transitioning to now start giving commissioners a couple of weeks actually before these resolutions come before an actual vote. So I think it's about 4 weeks to be exact, but I'll let Marisol give her spiel officially. But we are transitioning over to have 4 weeks in advance for every commissioner to have the necessary time to review all of the resolutions before us before we actually vote. So there's 4 weeks that we have time to read, ask questions throughout various meetings or via email to get answers and clarity. And I, for one, just want to thank the administration for moving in this direction. I personally appreciate the extra time. Commissioner Powell, give me 1 second. I'm going to turn it over to Marisol unless you have a question about it.
My question is procedural. I don't think we voted on the financial statements to approve the financial. So yeah. I'm happy to move that now.
Yes, thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Well, we got at least here 4 people, Amy, just say, because we're short some folks tonight. Okay, so Marisol?
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Good evening, commissioners. Back in early December, I came and presented the resolution revisions to the process. This is part of Dr. Jallo's independent monitor recommendation related to our resolutions and part of governance. And this month, and this is the only time that it will be happening, you have received 2 packets of resolutions at the same time. Commissioner LeBron, board members are going to be provided 6 weeks advance notice for resolutions. This gives us the opportunity to discuss, vet, and answer any of your questions. The way the process is intended to work is that the resolutions that are going to be considered at February's meeting get discussed today. And that way we can come to you with any additional details or information. In addition, our resolutions will be accompanied by a financial analysis as well as an executive summary for some that may require that. Not all of them, but the ones that have expenditures associated with them will have an executive summary and a financial analysis included. And those addendums will be part of the correspondence that Kalia sends to you, and but not part of the official resolutions packet. So I just wanted to be clear that they will be addendums, but not part of the official resolutions packet. So the discussion on the resolutions today will focus on the meeting this Thursday, as well as some that are going to be considered next February, correct, at the board meeting. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Marisol. So I don't know if anybody has any questions on these resolutions, but we certainly have a little bit more time again, because some of them are for February. So I just want to put that out there.
Looks like Commissioner Malloy has her hand up.
Commissioner Malloy?
Yeah, I do have a couple questions. Resolution, let's see, sorry, I've got to work my way through these. Okay, resolution 634 for facilities. I guess it just says it's they're correcting a numerical error. And I guess I'm wondering what the incorrect amount or what the error was on that resolution. It's for snow plowing removal. And there's just a Tandoy Asphalt and Seal Coating Company.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Good evening, Commissioner. We just did an account for one of the quadrants that we're applying for. So it was just kind of not figuring in an additional piece of work that they needed to do.
So it's an additional cost of 520.
No, just a cost adjustment.
Okay, okay, great, thank you. That's what I needed to know on that.
Yeah, no new money.
Okay. And then I guess this one is for you as well, Mr. Schmidt, sorry. Number 635, forgive my ignorance, but are we leasing from the city or vice versa?
Yes, we are. We will continue to lease from the city.
Okay.
The art center is based upon our usage. This year is obviously significantly less because we will only be using those art centers on Mondays and Tuesdays based upon our hybrid return model at those particular schools.
So that cost is based on our using them only twice a week?
Twice a week, and then the limited amount of hours that we would use each particular space. The gym will be more than an actual classroom. The pool will be a little bit less. It just kind of depends on the space that we're talking about and the number of hours we're actually using. It's based on a per hour usage,
okay,
not a total facility usage. And then you carve up the space based upon how it plays out. So each space is a little different analytic, but overall, 2 days a week, much less time in the space. And we will probably continue to adjust that. One of the variables would be like at School 12, for example, where we have 4 days a week of students with disabilities who are in the building. We may not need to use the art center space at all on Thursdays and Fridays. So that number could adjust, but it's only going to adjust downward.
So with our budget then for this year, given that, I mean, we're saving money technically because
Yes, we
we're
are.
not using the rec centers as much. So is that money that needs to be then set aside, or can that be used for other purposes?
Well, the dollar figure is about $120,000. We budgeted $160 for the art centers for the year. We would probably initially take a look at it in terms of any additional costs we would need for PPE and other services as we reopen schools. But once we define what those costs are, any residual would be put back into the A fund for a less of expenditure or a savings. I would anticipate that much of it will be a savings when we actually play it out for the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
You're
so
very
much.
welcome.
And I think that those were my only questions. Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. Commissioner Malloy on number 635, and Callie, you don't have to put it back up. I do want to say that this actually came up last month, but you all did not see it because I did have an issue that we were still technically being asked to pay the full price when we have not been in using the space or open. And so I do appreciate that administration went back and renegotiated that contract down and then represented it. So I just want to share that because that happened and you all did not know it, but I was like, I don't think so. We're not about to pay for space that we did not use or our students did not get to utilize because we're not even open. But I do appreciate, like I said, administration taking it back and doing their due diligence to renegotiate that, and that it is an up to 40,000. So in the event that anything changes or happens and our students do not end up utilizing any of those spaces or we shut down, that we're not obligated to pay them the full 40,000. We're only obligated to pay what our students use those spaces for.
One other point, Commissioner, they also will be reimbursing us for the utilities in the space as well.
Which in the past, we have not had that in our contract.
Not to the extent that they're doing now.
I just want to put that out there too.
Any savings we have, by the way, I forgot to mention, will be going to the Commissioner LeBron Fund.
No, do not even put that rumor out there because there are people who think the board stole the money and we did not. None of us did. So put that out there.
Inappropriate humor, okay?
Yeah, no. It should every single dollar should go back to our students in any capacity that it can to support them. But I appreciate you, Mike, doing that advocacy and not bringing that original resolution forward the way that it was written. So
Commissioner LeBron, I'm trying to have him apply the LIM principle. Less is more.
Yes, thank you. So I don't know if anybody does not have any questions, any additional questions on these resolutions, then we could just move forward and end this part and go into the professional development on title funds. So this is a much requested PD for board members and good timing for newer folks who are on the school board, and including myself, who has asked for this since I joined the school board and never had the opportunity to have professional development in this specific area. So.
All right, I do want to welcome Carrie Pecor and Glendine Miller, who will be joining us to do the PD. Thank you very much. We're all looking forward to it. Should be very interesting. Carrie, I'll share for you.
Great, thank you. All right, good evening, commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to come tonight to collaborate this evening on the subject of title grants. My name is Carrie Pecor, and I'm the Executive Director of Grants and Program Accountability, and I will be co-presenting tonight with my colleague, Glendine Miller. She is the Director of Financial Management, who is overseeing grants finance in our district right now. Polly, can you please show the next slide? So, the work of all of our title grants is really in support of the district's strategic priorities. So as needs are identified to implement strategies throughout the district's strategic plan, the funding should follow. Title grants are always using in conjunction with and in collaboration with other funding sources to make sure that we are doing our due diligence in using strategies that reflect the goals and that are outlined in our district strategic plan. So tonight's presentation is most directly in service of the fostering dynamic leadership priority, with a direct correlation to the first bullet you see here, which is managing school and district resources effectively. So title funding is a direct result of the implementation of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, also known as ESEA. And this was legislation that was signed into law in 1965 by President Johnson, who believed that the nation's first goal should be full educational opportunity. So along with the legislation being enacted, the ESEA followed by providing federal grants to state education agencies in order to improve the quality of elementary and secondary education in our nation. So the ESEA has seen a couple of reauthorizations throughout its years. In 2002, this legislation was reauthorized under the No Child Left Behind Act. The underpinning of this being to address achievement gaps among traditionally underserved students and their peers. However, under NCLB, the focus was really given specifically to academics with ELA and math in mind, and it was particularly aligned to achievement rather than growth and achievement. Also followed was significant restrictions in use of funds. So discussions started ensuing around 2012 in the Obama administration across multiple stakeholder groups, and it was determined that this law needed to be revisited. And in 2015, the ESEA from 1965 was again reauthorized under the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, as you all hear it referred to now. So the difference kind of between NCLB and ESSA is that ESSA is really requires our state, districts, and schools to develop rigorous plans to close achievement gaps across different subgroups of students, to increase equity and access for students, to improve the quality of instruction for all students, and to increase outcomes as aligned with both student growth and achievement. Another just quick point about ESSA is that some of the restrictive uses of funds that followed that aligned with really focusing specifically on academics and math and ELA in particular were removed, allowing grant funds to be used to support high quality education across the content areas and to address student social and emotional well-being. So each year, the district receives funding associated with the different ESSA programs that fall under the Every Student Succeeds Act in the form of title grants. So you can see the different title grants that our district is in receipt of each year. And this is what it looks like. It totals approximately $32 million. So it comprises about 3.6 of the RCSD's total budget. And you can see the goal and intent of each grant is listed underneath each grant on this slide. All of the funding, again, working in conjunction with other funding sources to make sure that we're providing high quality education to students. Next slide, please. So we'll start with Title I Part A, which is the largest of our title grants. And the intent and goal of Title I Part A is the overall improvement of school programs. So Title I Part A, as with all of the different grants that we'll touch on tonight, is federal flow-through funding, which means it's allocated by the federal government to the state education department, who then turns and allocates it out to local education agencies, or LEAs, layman's terms, districts. So it's entitlement funding, which means for the title grants, we do not have to compete against other districts to receive our allocation. For Title I Part A, our allocation is calculated using a formula that's based on poverty estimates and total enrollment in our district. So each of the grant will have a slide where we will project and touch on different programmatic policies and consideration toward the nuances of each grant. So programmatic policy associated with Title I Part A are as follows. So first, we're required to set aside a reserve for specific purposes prior to allocating out of the grant. And this is all via statute. So for Title I Part A, these reserves include a mandated equitable share. So we have to direct a portion of our Title I Part A funds to non-public schools in which Rochester City resident students are enrolled. We have a requirement to set aside a homeless reserve where the funding is supposed to be allocated specific to the needs of students and families that are in transition between homes. There's a required parent and family engagement set aside whereby 1% of our overall Title I Part A allocation is required to be directed to schools to support parent engagement activities. And following along kind of as associated with the parent component, schools are required to have school parent compacts, parent engagement policies, or adopt the district's parent engagement policy. And the district is required also to have a parent engagement policy. Title funding, Title I in particular, is required to fund supplemental supports to students with a focus on tailoring those supports to the needs of the students that it's supporting. Each school is required to conduct an annual review of its school-wide program, which in our district we do throughout the school comprehensive education plan development, and monitoring process. And then in receivership schools, this is done through their work creating and implementing and then progress monitoring their demonstrable improvement indicators that align with their receivership plans. Communication policy requirements for Title I include the district's requirement to invoke the voices of parents in the development of these school comprehensive education plans or SEPs, to communicate student progress, growth, and achievement to parents, not only on academics throughout the course of the regular school year, but also on high stakes state assessments, and to provide opportunities to communicate with parents in their preferred language. Couple last policy components for Title I Part A is that instruction that's provided by a teacher who is funded with Title I funds is required to be delivered by a staff member who holds the appropriate New York State credentials. And shared decision-making is also a component of Title I Part A. So each school is required to have a shared decision-making team. In our district, those exist as school-based planning teams. We are also required to have a district level team that invokes the spirit of the shared decision making efforts at the district level when we review the district comprehensive improvement plan, or the DCIP, as well as when we take a look at how title funds are being allocated. So considerations about Title I Part A is there's two different types of Title I programs that schools can run. School-wide programs may be operated in schools with poverty rates of greater than 40%. In a school-wide program, the funds can be used in conjunction with other funding sources. You can really support the needs of all of the students in the school by lifting the overall quality of the educational program being delivered. Targeted assistance programs operate in schools with poverty rates of lower than 40%. And in targeted assistance programs, funds are really to be utilized only to support students who are at greatest need and highest risk of service. So all of our schools in the district are Title I schools. All of our schools operate school-wide programs. The next slide shows how our Title I Part A allocation is allocated throughout the district. So you can see the bulk of the grant is allocated directly to our schools through the rank and serve process. So rank and serve is where each school, Title I school, receives an allocation based on its enrollment and poverty rate. And then the schools use the funds to resource the activities that are outlined within their SEPs. Our schools are currently using their rank and serve funding largely in the form of teacher salary to support supplemental positions in the buildings to help carry out the activities that are enacted through their SEP. The school improvement bucket allows for funding to be set aside to support other types of improvement initiatives, whether it is hosting summer programming for students who need it and coordinating those efforts at the district level, or providing further supports for TSI, targeted support and improvement, or CSI, comprehensive support and improvement schools, above and beyond their rank and serve allocations. This set aside is also used to support curriculum design and implementation as aligned with next gen learning standards. The required reserves, which we just kind of touched on in the last slide as part of a program policy requirement, comprise 8% of our Title I Part A allocation. 7% of our grant, of our Title I Part A grant is earmarked for administrative costs. So those would be the costs associated with administering the funds. So coordinating use of funds, planning, the budgeting, the accounting, the internal monitoring, the external monitoring process and coordination of that process, and then the internal and external reporting. And then this year, 2% of our title funds were earmarked to support pre-K programs, largely budgeted related to students' needs associated with digital learning. So moving on to Title IIA. The intent and purpose of this grant is to support effective instruction. And again, just like with Title I and all of these grants, it is a federal flow-through grant. So the allocation methodology for this grant is that 80% of the allocation is calculated using the same formula as Title I Part A, and then the remaining 20% is of the allocation is calculated based on the district's total enrollment. So programmatic policy, the non-public equitable share requirement exists in Title IIA. Additionally, you'll see the requirement to use 2A funds in various categories that are associated with the intent and purpose of the grant. Those categories include instructional coaching, supports for the coordination of PLCs, professional learning communities, principal and teacher leadership activities, induction and mentoring activities, and national board certification. Any professional development that's supported with Title II Part A funds are required to be sustained and longstanding versus standalone kind of one-shot deals. And the district is required to develop and implement a comprehensive professional development plan. A couple special considerations for Title II Part A is that there are uses that are allowable above and beyond those categorical uses that we just discussed. Typically, these uses are focused on recruitment and professional learning to support areas of need in specialized content areas or shortage areas, such as recruitment or PD associated to provide instruction for the areas such as STEM or English language learning or early childhood. Additionally, Title II Part A funds offer the option for transferability. So transferability is a flexibility across the different title grants 1 through 4 that's offered. That means the district can choose to transfer funds in or out of Titles 1, 2, and 4 into Titles 1, 2, and 4 in order to better meet the needs of the district. And you'll see one way that we opted into transferability this year in the next slide. So here's how the Title II Part A allocation is obligated out for the 2021 school year. So if we start with the green, this shows where we've opted into that transferability component. So we have transferred about 30% of our Title II Part A funds to be used to support additional supplemental social workers to provide direct supports to students. This was done in anticipation of an increased student need during the pandemic and during the budget deliberation process from last year into this year, and in looking at student data associated with social emotional development of students. So typically, funding a social worker to provide direct service to students would not be possible out of Title II Part A, but because we opted into transferability and kind of changed those funds into Title I Part A funds, that then makes the use of social workers or the allocation of social workers allowable. So next you see that the grant is allocated to support both the Office of Professional Learning in as much as it coordinates all of the professional learning throughout the district, as well as the Teaching and Learning Department in the form of the implementation of job-embedded professional learning through the use of instructional coaches. The grant also funds some recruitment initiatives, specific especially to providing opportunities for staff members to pursue credentials associated with providing bilingual education. Those required reserves make up 8% of our Title II Part A funds, and then there is 2% of that grant that's associated with administrative costs. Okay, we're on to Title III. The Title III grant that we received this year is Title III English Language Learning. So this grant's intent and purpose is to support ELs in developing English language proficiency and acquisition, and to support the staff that provides instruction and services to ELs to be able to infuse best practices and research-based practices into instruction, regardless of whether or not that, the background of that staff member is formally trained as an ENL teacher. So again, Title III is flow-through funding. We have an allocation of about $600,000 in our district. This grant does also require the equitable share to be directed to non-publics. That share for non-publics is calculated by the number of ELs that attend, ELs that are Rochester resident students who are attending those non-public schools. Additionally, activities to be funded here should include provision of supplemental language instruction programs for ELs that promote the acquisition of English and develop the child's ability to continue to learn and acquire language and content area knowledge in their home language. There's also a requirement to provide high quality professional development, again, to classrooms, teachers, or staff that wouldn't necessarily have specific training and instruction of ELs. Considerations associated with this grant is that there is another type of Title III grant entitled the Title III Immigrant Fund that is allocated to districts when they have seen a significant increase in their immigrant population over the course of a 2-year period. So we did not receive immigrant funding for the 2021 school year. However, we were able to access our carryover funding from this grant for 2021. Title III ELL is allocated as follows. So high quality effective PD accounts for the majority of the grant. So this allows the district to create and offer learning opportunities associated with providing instruction to ELLs. 39% of the grant provides supports for activities associated with parent, family, and community engagement. So some of this would include services for translation and interpretation. And then 15% of the grant aligns with provision of programs directly to students. This would include funds that support services provided to students at RIA and other additional language academies that are conducted throughout the course of the school year or over the summer. Required reserves sit at 3% for the Title III ELL grant. Okay, moving on. So the final title grant we'll touch on tonight is Title IV Part A. This is a grant that speaks to the need to support the whole child. Again, a federal flow-through grant. The amount allocated to the district is calculated using the same data as that is used for Title I Part A. So again, programmatic policy includes that required reserve in the form of the equitable share to non-publics. There is also a requirement to conduct a comprehensive needs assessment. We fold that into our needs assessment that's conducted during the development of the DSIP in our district. This grant also carries that requirement to use funds categorically. So there is a 20% requirement to allocate 20% of these funds to support activities that support a well-rounded education. 20% of the funds are to be used to support activities that promote the safety and health of students. After fulfilling those 20% set-aside requirements, the remaining 60% of the grant can be allocated across all 3 different priorities, the third of which being the effective use of technology. Just a quick note, there is a 15% cap on infrastructure should the district opt into using grant funds to support the effective use of technology. So this grant was new in the 2018-19 school year, and we just spent a couple minutes talking about those 20% set-asides that are required under Title IV Part A, but it is of note that those set-aside requirements were waived for the 2019-2020 school year, as well as the 2020-21 school year as a result of COVID. Title IV Part A does have the option for transferability as well. Next, this slide depicts how the Title IV Part A allocation is obligated for the 2021 school year. So you can see the bulk of this grant is to support programs that are in service of well-rounded education. So in particular this year, we've seen a shift in use of these funds to supply software that can be accessed during remote learning, as well as other types of technology that either staff or students might need to receive and provide instruction digitally. Activities associated with the safe and healthy students bucket, where you can see it's still that 20% requirement that's being met there, include supports for safety software such as Gaggle, as well as supports to develop and align health education curriculum, provide professional learning associated with health education to our health and PE teachers, and then other contracts to promote the safe and healthy well-being of students, such as PlayWorks. That's an example of one contract that is currently, I think, up for review to be funded in Title I Part A in the upcoming weeks. 12% of this grant is associated with that equitable share requirement to non-publics, and then 2% of the grant is associated with administrative costs. So the next slide, we're going to kind of touch on how we progress monitor the use of the funds. So in going back to the beginning of the session, we kind of talked about how title funding in the RCSD is used to support the overall delivery of high quality educational programs. in combination with other funds. So since we use these funds in conjunction with other funding sources, really the effectiveness of these funds is best evaluated through measuring the effectiveness of the overall quality of the educational program as a whole. So district progress is monitored by those ESSA accountability metrics that we kind of touched on at the beginning of the slide. The different indicators associated with that would include those such as student academic achievement, student growth and school progress, progress of English language learners, chronic absenteeism, for high schools, graduation rates, and college and career readiness index. So as the grant funds are directly tied to the ESSA regulations, we will monitor the effectiveness of the use of funds according to the framework of how we measure the district's progress toward meeting these ESSA accountability indicators, which is through the implementation of our district strategic plan. So the strategic plan is really driving program design within the district. The district's DSIP is then comprised of goals that reflect the strategic plan and formative metrics that then help the district work toward making progress on these goals and the ESSA accountability indicators. So through review of the school's SEPs or receivership plans, which are then aligned to the DSIP, which is aligned to the strategic plan, we are able to undertake a monitoring process that will provide us information about whether or not the activities that are being funded in the SEPs, in the DSIP, in the district strategic plan are really being effective. As we go through this monitoring process of these plans and identify new needs, then we revisit the funding sources and see if we need to repurpose or reallocate funds to address the needs as they emerge, always so that the resourcing is following the needs of the students. So I think that wraps it up for me in terms of the kind of the programmatic side of title grants. So at this time, I'm going to toss the ball to my colleague, Glendine Miller, who's going to take us through some of the fiscal implications of these grants.
Thank you, Carrie. I also, I'm not sure, President White, if you take the gavel over for PD or if it stays.
No, it doesn't make any difference. You can, if you're comfortable with it, keep it.
Okay, no, Glendine, continue. Thank you, Carrie.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you as well, Carrie. Good evening, commissioners. Good evening, everyone. I will be going over the fiscal requirements of the title grants. As Carrie mentioned earlier, the totals of the Title 1, 2, 3, and 4 is approximately $32 million. This represents about 3.6% of our district's total budget. During our budget process, these grants are budgeted based on the intent and purpose of each grant. This is done in consultation with administration. Once the grant is implemented and in our budget, a grant monitor is assigned to oversee spending. The grant monitor monitors the grants to ensure spending is within the budget and that all program expenditures are in compliance with the granting terms. The grant monitor also ensures reasonable and necessary and supplement, not supplant. Grant funding cycles. There are specific start and end dates to the title grants. Title funding dates do not align with the fiscal or school year of July 1st through June 30th. Instead, it runs from September 1st through August 31st. Expenses must be incurred within these dates. Supplement and supplement not supplant rules apply to title grants, which means that federal grant dollars cannot be used for services that would normally be paid for by the district. That includes any mandated services, costs previously covered by the district, or any costs related to core instruction. Like funds cannot be used to pay for like first grade, second grade, third grade teacher, or any other core materials. The funds cannot replace basic education needs. It is intended to be in addition and not in place of what's in the district. Reasonable and necessary. All costs must be reasonable and necessary. Costs should be related to student achievement. For example, funds cannot be used to pay for awards or alcohol. These requirements are also from the Uniform Grant Guidance, which applies to all federal grants. Allowability requirements can be found on the SED's website. Okay. Personnel Activity Report, or PARS. All individuals whose time is charged to a federal or federal flow-through grant, whether full-time or part-time, must certify that they're doing that activity. This is done through a Personnel Activity Report, or PAR, also sometimes referred to as time and effort reporting. Both full-time pay, part-time, and any additional hourly pay charged to the federal grant will generate a PAR. PARs are generated monthly, and certification is done by the employee through our internal PeopleSoft system. For budget amendments, any changes to the originally approved budget included in the application during the grant period requires an amendment approved by the state. This is done by way of a standard FS10A form, which is normally signed off by our superintendent. Payment cycles. Once the original title application is programmatically and physically approved by the state, our district receives an initial revenue payment. That is usually 20% of the full amount of the grant. Subsequent payments are made once future expenses incurred are above and beyond the initial payments. This is usually requested bi-monthly by way of an FS25. And for final reporting, 90 days after the grant ends, a final financial report called an FS10F is submitted to the state. Once the final report is approved, the final payment is made to us and the grant is closed out for that year. And this concludes our presentation for the night. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Thank you. I'm going to give my fellow board commissioners an opportunity to raise their hand now and ask questions. Does anybody have questions? So I have two questions and I apologize. One of them is actually, Carrie, both of them are actually part of your section. Just in the charts that you presented, one said rank and serve was 70%. And I just wanted some clarity around what that, who are those individuals or what that is. And then the second piece is, I'm sorry, I'm getting an Amber Alert right now. I'm not sure why, but school compensation plans, what classifies well-rounded? So that was actually a second part of the presentation, is that well-rounded programs. And I just wanted some clarity around how we define well-rounded programs in the district. Yep, that one, rank and serve.
Sure. So that 70% of the grant, so that is funding that's directed directly to schools through that poverty enrollment calculation. Okay. And schools are really using those funds for supplemental eligible FTEs, such as an intervention teacher, to provide supplemental interventions. We have some schools that offer Regents review sections. So portions of folks' salary who are providing that type of instruction would also be included here. Also, we provide full day kindergarten in our district. So half of kindergarten teachers' salaries are charged to Title I as an effort to making sure that we're lifting the quality of the educational programming that we are delivering in our district. So those would be some examples of the types of FTEs that you would see schools funding with the rank and serve allocations.
Yeah, is there a way to have, I guess, more details like school by school so that we know this school is using 10% to support this amount? And I do want to say, I recognize that many of our school districts around us only offer half-day childcare, and full day, not childcare, but full day pre-K, UPK is a blessing for many families, myself included. So I want to put that out there, but I would like to understand under rank and serve what that means in each school if possible. And I don't know if that exists, but maybe that's something we can have further discussions around so that we can have a better understanding and more detail and clarity exactly how that then means in each school or is aligned in each school. But I do see Dr. Jallo and Commissioner Powell both have their hand up, so I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Jallo and then Commissioner Powell.
So I was wondering if it would be able at a future date to get a little more detail about how the money is actually spent. And I appreciate the presentation from a professional development point of view, but details, $32 million is a lot of money for a district, and to spend that kind of money and have the outcomes that this district has warrants asking deeper questions about, Title, like when you say you're spending 13% on, what is that, school improvement? What does that mean? What does that look like? And are you getting a return for 13% of $26 million? What can you say after you spent 13% of $26 million that is better about school improvement before you spent 13% of $26 million? I mean, where's the evidence of impact on any of these things? I mean, I think at some point we have to get to a level where we can have more specificity around how these amounts of money are spent on children and programs in the district.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell?
So speaking of specificity, I went to the budget and picked out a school at random, and I do see that proposed funding identifies Title I funds specifically in the one I'm looking at, kindergarten, librarians, school improvement. So I'm wondering what more specificity do we need other than a summary that that reconciles the proposed funding in the budget by school to the total Title I pie.
Can I answer that?
Please.
Yes.
So if you have a receivership school or a CSI school and you know that they've received X amount of money, can we see where that school improved? Did they improve in English? Did they improve in math? Did they improve in graduation rate? Did they improve in chronic absenteeism? Did they improve in suspension? We should be able to see this is the amount of money that was spent on the school. This is the return for the amount of money spent on that school in terms of the different indicators, whether or not it worked. Otherwise, you end up repeating programs that look good and feel good, but didn't give you impact and change the outcomes for the schools. That's why the number of receivership schools is not going down, it's going up. So we have to at least stop for a minute and look at, are we maximizing and optimizing monies as it relates to these schools, especially the schools that have these designations.
Commissioner Powell?
So understanding where you're going with that, is it possible that we could have someone from data and research to compile and correlate the Title I funding to growth by school, and thereby identifying, I know it doesn't isolate all the confounding factors, but one might be able to draw some conclusions about which schools are using the Title I funds most effectively, if based on the growth scores or some other metric, in their school improvement plan.
Is that a question for the question log?
Well, or for the superintendent, or for Dr. Jallo, anybody who thinks that's a good or a bad idea.
I just want to also clarify, Ms. Adams, Commissioner Adams, I see your hand up. Just let me clarify. What I'm requesting is with that 70%, a breakdown of how that 70% is being spent in schools. And that was my initial request. If there's a second request, and well, I want to recognize that, yes, this information could be found in the budget. I don't want to have to go through 800 plus pages of documents to look for it when I want to understand in one area, here's Title I, 70% of Title I Part A is being allocated under rank and serve. and this is how these schools are utilizing it with these positions, these titles. But it goes back to my other question too, is what classifies well-rounded? And so I just want the clarity on that, but I'm going to pause on that because Commissioner Adams has his hand up. Commissioner Adams?
I just need to go on record. Dr. Jallo has said that her reasoning for us getting an increase in receivership schools, I totally disagree with that. I don't believe it has anything to do with schools not reaching goals. They're changing the goalposts and everything. Adding new stuff, adding attendance and everything to this thing. And then they're decreasing the support. So I just don't want us to be, we need to be clear about that when we talk about what's causing us to have more receivership schools, is they have been changing the goalposts and everything on that. And the support has gone down. You got some schools even embracing praying for receivership status just to get some funding. So that's all I needed to go on record for.
All right, thank you. Dr. Jallo and then Commissioner Powell.
I just want to add, I don't think it should only be done for Title I also. I think we just had high school graduation data come up, and there's a huge variety of scores or rates of graduation rates between your schools within the district. And so, but everybody gets this money. So to see how the money allots to the high school graduation rate and see how that money is used to support high school graduation rates or college career readiness, or whether it's being used to support that at all, I think you're at a point where you have to look and see how your monies are being spent to see what kind of return that you're getting on your money. And that's my point, but I don't want it just for Title I. You have Title III, that's a whole nother issue. How is that money being spent to improve outcomes for those students? Because you're not seeing it for the amount of money that you're spending. And so I think there's a time where you have to just unpack it and see how the money is actually being spent. There are schools where it's being spent and you see the outcomes, and another school might want to replicate that so that they see the same outcomes. But until you unpack it to the school level, you'll never really know.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell?
I agree with Dr. Jallo, but I also do agree with Commissioner Adams that, I mean, but I think that in order to determine which schools are actually using this Title I dollars well, don't we need to have some data research exploration of that? I didn't get an answer to that question.
An answer to what question?
The question is, wouldn't it be a good idea to ask someone in our data and research department to run an analysis or correlation between Title I funding and improvements in some of their school improvement benchmarks?
Yeah, so are you looking for me to answer that, or just all the board, the entire board? Or
As I said before, if the superintendent wants to handle it, or if Dr. Jallo wants to react to that as a potential starting point to a solution.
Okay.
My reaction.
I just want to say, Dr. Jallo, before you continue, that all I want to see right now personally is how we're spending the 70% under this very generic rank and serve title, which I'm sure it came from the state, but I just want to understand what that actually means in terms of individuals and schools and how those dollars are being utilized. For me personally, until I see that and have a better understanding along with other pieces of this presentation, I don't want to make any assumptions around the outcomes of a school improving or not improving because they got money or didn't get money. I need to see that data first to have a better understanding for me, but I'll let you answer.
I mean, all I was going to say is I think the idea is a great idea to look at the data and make an assessment based on the money spent per school, how that money relates to the data outcomes or the impact on children. I do think that that's excellent. I can't answer for you what rank and serve means. I have a guesstimate, but I wouldn't even put that in the universe. I'd like to see a detailed explanation from the state what that means, and then what it means here in this district. I'm not familiar with that terminology.
So what we'll do, Kalia, I know you've captured that. We can take that back to our meeting with the deputies, and we can talk. I can talk that through with Dr. Morris and Deputy Superintendent Martinez Davis. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, President White, I see your hand up.
Yep, thanks. I too was wondering what that rank and serve meant. So I appreciate someone tracking that down and explaining to us what that means. Additionally, while I certainly agree and have said it many times in my career here on the school board that there ought to be some understanding of whether we're getting a return on investment. That's just like elementary, fundamental business practice, whether you're public or private. And I guess I wouldn't be shocked because I've asked for it previously if it's not being done as standard practice. Maybe the assumption is we're getting this money, we're just going to spend it however we want to spend it and not think about whether that money is money well spent. But I have raised that issue countless times, and it's shameful that it's not, we don't have those answers. The other thing I will say though, even not taking away that comment that we do need to know whether we're getting a return on investment, even though it's Title I, it's federal money, we have to be cognizant of the fact that Rochester, people often like to compare us to other jurisdictions and other districts. We are actually uniquely situated in Rochester. And while that data may show that a particular program is not working and we need to, retool what they're doing there or replicate what they're doing someplace else, the stark reality is that Rochester sits uniquely in the state of New York and actually in the entire country as one of the most impoverished districts in the nation. We rank third behind Detroit. So people can talk about, we're not getting the results that we need out of the district, but what we do does not happen in isolation. There is a big world outside every school building, and much of the city of Rochester is an impoverished world. And I can't account for what other districts are doing. We can account for how we spend our money, but we cannot continue to compare ourselves to other districts when the data, the demographics tell us we are one of the poorest communities in the country. And no matter how we're spending our money, and this perhaps is part of what Ricardo is saying, it may not be enough unless people start spending money outside the buildings and inside the buildings to address those very systemic issues that cause children to get behind the 8 ball before our teachers and our principals and our cafeteria people even see them. I don't know how you put that into the calculus about whether we're spending money effectively, and I think we should, but you cannot leave that out of the calculus. You cannot say Rochester's not, we're getting all this money and we're not getting a return on investment. That may be the case, but we have to look at what's happening outside of Rochester. And again, I think maybe Commissioner Adams, well, then I'll just make this my point. I don't know if it's his point, but sometimes we're not investing appropriately in the challenges that we have. And we're leaving it to Leslie and all her principals and all those cafeteria people to fix what is wrong outside. And that is not enough. And again, I just want to emphasize, unless someone has done the in the weeds data analysis, do not compare us to other districts. Because while there may be results in the buildings in New York City, they don't have the poverty that we have here in Rochester.
I don't know, Van. I just want to say when we talk about poverty in New York City, I coming from the Bronx, that is a different lived experience than my poverty experience in Rochester. We may have more poverty, but we certainly have way more resources. And I'll put this out there. You could be in a shelter here for 90 days, and in New York City, you are in a shelter for 13 years and counting. Lived experience. I have a brother right now who's been homeless in a shelter for 13 years. He can't get housing right now. So I don't want to have a comparison and say who's poor. Poverty is terrible no matter where we're experiencing it. I just want to go back to say the rank and serve, I'm not making a judgment on outcomes. I just want to understand how those dollars are spent, because there is a separate section of this presentation that was classified well-rounded programs. And I think for me, that's where I want to have an understanding of how we as a district define well-rounded programs and what the outcomes are there. I just want to clarify all that.
Commissioner LeBron, let me just say, I have spent much of my life in and out of New York City. I understand what you're referring to. I've never experienced it, perhaps like some folks, but I certainly understand what's happening in New York City. I just want to point out, I didn't raise the comparison. I'm responding to it. I think we have to address the challenges that we have in our district, and those challenges include how we spend our money and are we spending it effectively. Those challenges also include that we have intense, unprecedented, and these aren't my demographics. These are demographics that come from the US Census Bureau. They do the proportionality. They look at New York City, they look at Detroit, and they have determined that proportionally we have more poverty. But let me just repeat, I didn't bring up the point about New York City versus, I was responding to it. Just look at us for what we have, and what the data tells us, what the Census Bureau tells us is our poverty is only right behind Detroit. And that's just the reality.
Okay, just a couple of more questions. So, and I don't want to keep everybody, it's 8:19. I know we're on a timeline we were supposed to go into new business at 7:45, but this is an important presentation and one that has been again requested year after year after year. I do want to ask and get clarification around what classifies a well-rounded program. That was a significant portion of percentage being spent in that area. So we can turn to that slide. And then just having a better sense of understanding of how the school-based planning teams are fully constituted to then have autonomy around how they spend these dollars. And I am more than happy to submit questions in writing if some of these questions cannot be answered today. I just ask that the questions are also, the answers are responded to publicly, so that the community also has an opportunity to hear answers around some of these questions, especially when it comes to parent voice at these tables. But can I get some clarification around what 66% of well-rounded education programs mean in this context?
Yeah, I can address that for you, Commissioner. So well-rounded education programs, there are different categories that I guess you would call them subcategories within the consolidated application where we have to allocate out funds. At a high level, those would include access to accelerated programs such as AP or IB classwork, engagement with technology, and improved access to arts and music. So considering the fact that we are in the middle of this pandemic and providing a significant amount of instruction digitally, most of what you see in the 66% speaks to support such as software, Chromebooks, other types of devices that were purchased with this grant and in order to support those needs during the pandemic this year.
Okay, and then you don't have to answer this right now, Carrie, because I'm actually sending Kalia some additional questions, but one of those will be a follow-up to pre-pandemic. If we weren't in a pandemic, what would the 66% be spent on? So I understand we made some adjustments to meet the needs as best as we could for students because we're in a pandemic with technology and Chromebooks. But pre-pandemic, what would 66% of well-rounded education programs look like and mean in what schools? And this goes back, Carrie, just so you know, and everyone here, to a much larger conversation that has been going on around how we select programs for this district and partners and the outcomes that they do provide for our students. And so I just want to be very clear, because I know that sometimes it's starting to sound like folks are blaming our schools, but we pay a lot of money to have certain partners that support our children, whether it's through extended learning or other partnerships and opportunities. And are our students really benefiting from those partnerships and programs. So I want to remove the concept that this is only focused around internally what's happening in schools. And Van, I do agree there's only so much that can happen internally, but I am curious for the entire board to evaluate what those processes look like and what those outcomes look like for the organizations that are partners with us and that we pay a lot of money for, what those outcomes are. So I just want to leave it at that.
Commissioner LeBron, I was looking for the applause sign, but I can't find it, so.
Oh, thank you. Well, I am done. I don't know if anybody else has any more questions. I'm going to be sending my questions right now to Kalia for the board question log. And if there are no additional questions, I'm going to turn over the gavel to you, President White.
Well, I came back, but I misplaced my agenda. I think all we have left, if memory serves, is to go into executive session. Or Kalia, you'll correct me on that if I'm wrong.
Incorrect. I do apologize. We do have the special education. We have the special education presentation that we did move from the top of the meeting to new business here.
And Leslie, who was going to give that report? You got somebody to give that report?
I do, Desiree Richmond.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Kaya, you put up the PowerPoint. So this
Give me
evening,
one second.
Okay, I'm just gonna, as you bring it up, the purpose of tonight is to present to you the district plan. And you should have received that. I know it's a very long document and we wanted you to have it in advance so that you could, review it. And really this provides tonight also an overview of the special education department. And I do want to note that the date is incorrect on this slide only because the presentation was originally slated for the 21st. So I will make sure I correct that and send it forward. So let's talk about the district plan. It is a requirement that is in education law, and it's also part of 200.2 section of the commissioner's regulations. And there are specific components of the plan that need to include description of our special education services, some of our district data for your review, a method to evaluate the goals of our program, policies and practices for space, allowing for proper space in classrooms and buildings, and accessible instructional materials, as well as a fiscally responsible budget. So we can go to the next slide. So all that we do is aligned with the district and the special education strategic action plan. So just to give you an overview, our focus this year has really been on compliant practices. And I think we've talked about that a little bit before, about high quality compliant IEPs and consistent processes in place for our CSE and our CPSE committees. Obviously, parent participation is one of the highest on our list for compliant practices as well. We also are focusing on equality and cultural sensitivity, which includes important information and approaches for the social, economical fairness and family empathy, monitoring our classification of our students, monitoring suspension rates for our students, and continuing to utilize restorative practices across the schools. And when we talk about least restrictive practices, we're really focusing on providing students their education in general education as much as possible. And of course, we need to always be focused on our improved performance for our students with disabilities so we can empower them to reach their full potential. Our next slide. So the plan has an outline. There is a table of contents and it follows these sections. So there is an introduction and there is that includes an overview of the department objectives, definitions related to special education and so forth. Part 2 is our largest section, which talks about the Committee on Special Education and the Committee on Preschool Special Education processes and procedures. Section 3 is our procedural safeguards, due process rights for our families and students. Section 4 discusses disciplining of students with disabilities. It includes a section on manifestation determination meetings. And section 5 has miscellaneous items that include textbook considerations, instructional materials in alternative formats, and child fund responsibilities. The appendices that are attached will continually be updated from year to year, because that includes our continuum and our description of our programs, including preschool. It'll also talk about it's attached there is our strategic action plan and some data. So that's important for each year for the special education department to provide you an update, although this plan will be reviewed every 2 years. So the next slide, next couple of slides, we're going to go into the special education data. So I wanted to share with you our classification rate, which is currently at about 26%. Preliminarily, I wanted you to see the 2021 school year has the preliminary data. We have some 18-19, 19-20 information for you, broken down by number of preschool students, number of K-12, and the number of general education students and our total enrollment. And if you go to the next slide, this will show you our classification by disability. And there's a total of 6,087 students. The next slide will give you a little better visual of our disability classifications. And you can see that other health impairment and learning disability are the highest, followed by speech and language, autism, emotional disabilities, intellectual disabilities. We have multiple disabilities, orthopedic impairment, deafness, and visual impairment, and hearing impairment. When we talk about least restrictive environment, as this is one of our focus goals this year, we really want to maximize the extent appropriate that students with disabilities are educated with students who are not disabled. You can go to the next slide. So I wanted you to see this by 18-19, 19-20, and 2021 comparison. These are students with disabilities that spend 80% or more of their day in the general education classroom. They receive their special education services there, but we have been steadily going up in this area, which is very important because we know that students perform best when they have an environment that includes their general education peers so that there could be more flexible groupings and access to the curriculum. The next slide.
Can I interrupt for a second? In terms of the context of progress or the lack thereof, and you give me a very short answer. You presented a PowerPoint slide that indicated other health-related impairments was about 20-something%. I think is what it was, 27%. That was Dr. Elliott, I think her name, Judy Elliott, had highlighted that as an area of concern. Can you tell me whether that has gone up or down in recent years? Or if you can't, that's fine. We can put on the question log.
I believe it will go on the question log. I can get that data over a number of years, but from when I looked at it, it's staying pretty steady at that. So it's gone down slightly, but it remains. I've looked into that a little more, and I wanted to share with you what I believe is happening with that other health impairment. I'll remind you that it does include attention deficit disorders. So when students are significantly impacted by attention deficit, that is the classification that is used. In addition, when young children come before us and we have to make a determination of whether it's an emotional disturbance or other health impairment, that's where students with behavior challenges usually fall in those two areas. It is very difficult to determine that's an emotional disturbance at a young age. So many times CSEs, along with families, agree that another health impairment at that young age is the best way to go.
We realize, though, that many people believe that that's sort of a catch-all area to put young Black boys in particular in, because they can't figure out how to deal with them. And I did a paper back in the 1980s on that disproportionality, and it looks like the figures really just haven't changed. So I get what you're saying, but as you probably know, there's a sizable portion of the profession that looks at that, the research profession looks at that and says, that's where the problem is. I know that's what Judy Elliott said, and the fact that it hasn't changed much is a bit of concern to me, but we can talk about it later.
So I want you to know we are focusing on that. And one of the things that we're doing is the regional associates are providing targeted instruction and professional development for our central CSE chairs who make those decisions initially, and for any significant changes to maybe an external placement. So we're starting with that group, and hopefully we can turnkey that to ensure that we're taking a closer look at that classification.
Can I ask for a follow-up in this same screen?
Yep.
I had my hand up, but I was going to wait to the end. I appreciate your looking into it and your explanation, but this area, when compared to other school districts, like similar districts like Buffalo and Syracuse, have you compared this particular classification to our peers across the state? And is there a way to drill down further and disaggregate what portion of that is ADD or suspected emotional disturbance, as opposed to an infinite number of other more specific health impairments? This is not only is this the biggest piece of our pie, but it's the single biggest area where we diverge from our peers across the state.
So I can certainly pull that data, and my team and I can start looking at specifically the profiles of the students that are classified other health impaired and see if we see patterns to that. I hope, though, that I guess I sometimes am a little less concerned about, if they're classified appropriately, the label to me is one piece of it, right? And to me, the most important part of the individualized education program are the present levels of performance that lead to the goals, that lead to the services that are appropriate for the student. And remember, no one should be coming to the table, CSE, unless there have been pre-referral strategies and interventions attempted prior to classification. I always am much more interested to see that we're aligning with the profile of the student with the aligned programs and services that they need to advance in their education.
I appreciate everything you just said. I truly do. But when you're trying to find out what's wrong with the system, one of the best ways to do that is to drill down and see, why are we such outliers compared to our peers? It may be that our peers are doing everything wrong, but it's not likely, right? It's likely that we're doing something different that may or may not be justified. And while philosophically everything you say is absolutely right, there's something about the way we're actually implementing that individual education plan that's falling short of the desired outcome. And I think we can all agree on that. I mean, we wouldn't be where we are if that weren't true. So so that leads you back to the question of, you know, well, if we classify fewer kids, then we won't have so many kids being failed by the classification. So again, the drilling down is about, to my way of thinking, is about finding the low-hanging fruit in terms of what we can fix, right? And if one of the things we can fix is by taking a closer look at the classification process, that's wonderful. If we can do it by, you indicated young students often actually have emotional disturbance, but you can't really tell because they're so young, then we should be able to see the evidence of that by the number of students that get declassified as they get older. So,
I'm sorry, Commissioner Powell, go ahead.
No, I was trying to come up with a summary sentence, but I don't need to, I think.
So I really see it as a both and, right? We need to look at it to make sure that the entry point for kids, like Desiree said, that the pre-referral strategies and the ways that students enter into the special education process have integrity, and that we've done everything that we can to have special education be the outcome. But similarly, from what you have shared, we do have to drill down and we need to look at, is this predominantly males or females? Is it a particular grade level that we see this happening? So I really feel like if we come at it from a multi-perspective approach, we can begin to make the improvements that we need to make in the department.
Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, I just want to clarify and say that personally, I don't want to see another report, because I want to say there's been enough reports in special education for us to understand that our Black and brown, but primarily Black boys in our district are mislabeled and classified under special education and other health impairments. And I do believe wholeheartedly that this is a prime example of structural racism within our district, but that also, if you look at other Big Fives, that they potentially have the same outcomes because they have the same issues of structural racism in large urban, predominantly Black and brown school districts, whether it's in the state of New York, Chicago, Detroit, I name it. I have fellows in all those large school districts, and we have this conversation, and the trend that we historically have seen is that Black boys in particular, brown too, but Black boys are often, like Van said, labeled with other health impairments under this special education. So I appreciate if you're saying you're going to figure out and identify right from referral stages and classification to ensure that it is not related to race. And that's, I don't even know how else to say it other than this is an example of structural racism in our district.
I think that's where I see from my time here that in particular, elevating the curriculum for our students, which I know is happening. We've started to develop some partnerships, special education and our curriculum experts, to ensure that we're putting in front of all of our students access to grade level curriculum. It doesn't matter where you are in special education, even if it's slightly modified, they have to have exposure to grade level curriculum. And I think that, along with strong pre-referral strategies, I often had these challenges, to be honest with you, in other districts that I've worked for, where You know, if you're working on a child who's struggling with reading and you're giving the proper pre-referral strategies and that the gap isn't getting wider, then just because they're still below grade level, it doesn't mean they need special education. It means they're getting what they need, right? I mean, they're not, their skills aren't decreasing. We're maintaining them. We're closing the gap a little bit. They're learning strategies. They deserve to be in general education with supports. And if it leads to special education, which means specially designed instruction, that's what makes special education special, is the specially designed instruction. So then that's what we need to provide them. And that's what the plan puts forth for us to focus on. But I definitely will bring this back to my team and try to really analyze the other health impairment group of students in particular, and see if we can put something together for you. Okay, so I think I was...
Sorry about that.
Yep, that's where we were. So we do want children in the least restrictive environment. There's a lot of research that supports that. And 80% or more of our day, we do want to see this number go up. So if we go to the next slide, this is students inside regular classroom 40 to 79% of the day. This goes down and goes up a little bit, but this is about where I would expect it to be, because if the 80% or more goes up, we should see this either go up or go down. It should stay around this level, but I'm glad to see that we're holding pretty steady for this inside of regular classroom 40 to 79% of the day. And then the next slide shows us inside a regular classroom less than 40% of the day. This number should go down. This is what we want to see. We want to see it go down, even if it's small. We take everything we can get, but hopefully this will continue to go down as we work to create least restrictive environment for our students. So I know you've seen this slide before. I just wanted you to know we are seeing progress with the graduation rate. We do have the pathways. We have our transition team working tirelessly to ensure that our students are given every opportunity they can to achieve a local or Regents diploma, and you know, and using the career development and occupational studies credential has really helped our students.
This one
My presentation for you tonight, but I didn't know if you have any additional questions for me regarding the district plan and its contents. And certainly I will follow up on some of your questions.
I did want to note that I submitted a question to the question log today that asked about an issue that many of us frequently hear out in the community about graduation rates. And one of the things that is frequently said, it's often done on anecdotal evidence, is that many of our students need remediation. They often refer to MCC and say, well, you know, MCC is telling us that these students that graduate need remediation in order to be successful. And so I asked Kaya to submit a series of questions related to that, to see if we have dug deep into that anecdotal story that we hear from people throughout the community. Is that true? And even if it were true, do we know where our students, whether they need remedial services at SUNY at Albany or Plattsburgh or Catholic University or Georgetown, when we have students that go there? I think, and then what of those students, were they students with disabilities? My suspicion is the district has probably not attracted students to make this kind of assessment, but I think we really do need to begin to look at that if we're going to look at whether our students are successfully transitioning into college and what difficulties and challenges are they having. My guess would be that the students who end up at MCC, and this could be wrong, and only with you all having the data would I know this, those students have more limited options than, let's say, a student who ends up at SUNY at Albany or or New Paltz. And so they may have had some history of academic challenges. I don't think we, and what I said to this person last night is I don't think we can make conclusions based on anecdotal evidence. And even if there was such direct factual evidence, I would want to know what the broader community looks like. And to this PowerPoint presentation, those students that need remedial services, are they students with disabilities? You know, so I don't know how deep, Leslie, your staff or your Office of Accountability, how deep they dig, but in order to understand what we're doing, you know, we talked earlier about getting return on investment. It is not only whether we're getting where we're going with the ELA scores, math scores, and graduation rates. It's what's happening to these students when they get out. And I don't want us to be judged on somebody's, you know, incident that happened with their cousin. That may suggest broader patterns, but I think we should have some understanding about what exactly is happening to our students. And if our students do need remediation, are they our students with disabilities? And what is happening to our students that go to other schools other than MCC? Because that's what they're always saying. They say MCC, the students, but nobody talks about the schools that, you know, my kid graduated from RCSD and she went to Temple, right? My son went to SUNY Buffalo. And I'm sure other people in this room know people that went to other places. They don't ever talk about whether those students need remediation. I know my kids didn't, but we don't know what's happened to my next door neighbor, Ed Lopez's kid went to Harvard. So Leslie, that question is out there and it does relate to the students with disabilities. So I'm hoping accountability can look into that.
So there's just very quick response. There's two different kind of reports that we get. Certainly you'll get what happened to the class of the most recent class was 2020. So it will say how your students did. If you have a certain number of students who attend that college or university, and it varies from college and university, we certainly do get a very extensive report from Monroe Community College. So that's one thing. Sometimes it's sent to me, other times it's sent to the principal. So we can look into that. The other piece that you combine that with is to see where our high school students are attending, right? So each high school or secondary school that has students with seniors can say that, with the class of 2020, 2 went to Harvard, 4 went to the University of Rochester, 1 went to UPitt. So we can look at that and then try, and once we know where our students are going, then we can try and see if we can't get the information about how they're doing. So that's a two-step process, but we do know we often get reports from the colleges and universities where our students heavily attend.
Okay. All right, thanks. So are there any other questions? Let me go to my.
Yeah, we got our hands up.
I'm looking here, Commissioner LeBron.
So just to add to this conversation, so Dr. Myers, the report that you're talking about, like what happened to the class of 2020, I always kind of looked at that as like the college's kind of good PR way to kind of track things. But personally, I worked at MCC for a number of years and primarily worked with students who were tied to the Department of Social Services, whether they were getting assistance or their family members were getting assistance, and DHS was requiring the children who are now in college to do WEP in order for their parents to continue to get their services. And what I would say is that a large percentage of my students that came through from RCSD that tested through AccuPlacer absolutely had to take transitional courses. And that's an issue that MCC has highlighted and uplifted for a number of years and continue to do so. And why is that important? Because it means that our students are using their financial aid in a much faster way at a 2-year community college to get up to par college level. So if they're coming in and they test TRS 101 for English, they consider that 7th, 8th grade English and reading and writing. Our students would have to restart that, take TRS 101, 103 before they could jump to 105, before they can jump to College English 101. So you have 4 semesters right there where a student is using their financial aid just to get to college level courses. And the foundation courses, right? You need English 101 for a lot of courses, and you need Math 104, which are college course math work, before you can move on. And there's also that track of 092, 094, 098 before you can hit 104. So a lot of our students do experience that. I personally know students who tried to go to 4-year colleges, tried to do their entrance exam, did not test. And those advisors would then say, go to MCC and do those courses there and then transfer over. And I say that because I went through a very non-traditional route for college. So I want to encourage any student who's experiencing that right now, that you can do it and survive it. It really sucks that you have to use your financial aid for that. But that data, I think, could be really expanded on. And I would love for us to do that and take that on, Leslie, by looking at financial aid, AccuPlacer scores, and where students are testing at when they come to MCC. And I do believe MCC can pull up the AccuPlacer results based on the schools that they're attending without identifying students, just by the number of schools that they attended, their AccuPlacer scores and where they tested and whether it was transitional courses or not, and how much of their financial aid they used up before they were college ready. So I want to uplift that is a real lived experience for many of our students that do graduate from the district and move on. And for those students who make it into Brockport without, but need that remedial, we have EOP, and I am grateful for them because that was my middle child who graduated from the district and took EOP courses over the summer, and they do some college preparatory lessons and courses for them before the regular freshmen start. So there are colleges locally that figure out some alternatives to get students there, but traditionally they use financial aid. And one thing I just want to say, Van, or you can come back to me at the end, but I do want to just thank staff, if that's okay, for the presentation, because I didn't formally thank them. And I do want to thank both Carrie and Geraldine for putting together this this title's presentation for this board, which is something I've been asking about. I know other board members have been asking about, but I did not formally turn over the gavel and thank them for that presentation. So
Yeah,
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for doing that. Because it was a lot of work and it gives us some springboard for the conversations that we've had. So yes, you're absolutely right to thank them. Commissioner Clark.
Yes, I wanted to chime in also regarding particularly our special education scholars. Many of them don't graduate with Regents degrees, so they probably are not going on the college track. And the other thing that, I hear from various employers is that they can't hire our graduates because they are not coming in with the prerequisite skills for the various skilled trade positions that become available. And I was wondering if we could add a piece where we look at basically the employment rate of the students that graduate that are not going on to MCC or Brockport or some of the other major colleges and universities.
Leslie, if I could just jump in, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I do think as we continue to experience increases in our graduation rate, and let me just inform folks, our graduation rate has been going up for more than a decade, long before COVID or even the additional pathways. It's been going up pretty steadily for about 10, 12 years. It's the highest it's been in 22 years, I think is the last figure. But as we figured out how to do this more effectively over the years, we have to step up and figure out what's the next step for us to evaluate our success. It can't just be, okay, you got your diploma. So at some point, and I don't know where the money, if you need money to do this additional step, but at some point we're going to have to start looking at other indicia of success of our graduates. Like Commissioner Clark said, how many of them are employed? Like Commissioner LeBron said, how many of them are able to pass a test and avoid all those extra courses that they need to get themselves out? What are they spending to get themselves to the fundamental level? So at some point, and maybe the time is not right now, but since we've really figured out, I don't have any concerns about our graduation rate continue to go up. And let me repeat, It's been going up for a long time, long before the pathways or long before COVID. We figured it out. And so the next question, legitimate question is, okay, they're graduating, they got their diplomas, but are they ready? And Leslie, I know you got a lot on your plate, but at some point, that is going to have to be the agenda of our Office of Accountability. Any thoughts on that, Leslie?
I think that's something that certainly we can take a look at, given some of the things that I shared previously, and we can take a look at how do we figure out how our graduates are doing. That would be through the Office of Accountability, but it also would involve Deputy Martinez Davis's side of the house through the counseling and the work that they're doing with students as far as that work. So we can take a look at that, sure.
Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, I actually just want to make sure I said Glendine's name correctly, and Carrie, and just thank them. But Van, I also want to acknowledge some staff that won some awards very quickly, if I could do that now, if you don't mind.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So Kelly Briggs, who was here last week from our community schools, the director who presented, she was awarded the Champion Award with Healthy Kids with Common Ground Health. And I couldn't say anything last week because the awards show was on Friday. And so Leslie, I'll send you some more information so that you can also formally thank them. But I do want to thank Kelly for winning that award. She has done an incredible amount of work, more than I think we are aware of. I know more than I was ever aware of. And even as I got to hear all of the reasons why she won the award, I just want to make sure we uplift that. And then also Carlos Cotto and Tony Jordan, along with Ray from the city from My Brother's Keepers, all three of them also were recognized with the Uplifting Fathers Award for all of the work that they're doing for fathers and single dads or fathers holding down households or leading households. So I just want to thank them, and then also make sure I'm saying staff name correctly. And I apologize if I am saying that wrong, but thank you. That's it.
Commissioner LeBron, thank you for doing that. But the problem is it's 9 o'clock and I don't know how many people are listening. So I would ask that you, or somehow if maybe-
I'm gonna get it to Leslie and
on Thursday, because I think it'd be great if other people, I don't imagine too many people are watching right now. So these are good points to be made, but more people ought to be aware of the good news. So yeah, if you could work that out with Leslie and figure out how we can recognize those people on Thursday night, that would be great. Commissioner Adams?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to put it in the question log, but Commissioner Powell had made a statement earlier that the fund policy is not the reason we was in the mess that we was in. It was other action. And if that can't be, if that statement can't be challenged, then I need her to know that I'm gonna support her. But if it can be challenged, I need somebody to challenge it.
I'll challenge it, but I'll challenge it offline, Ricardo.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Thank you, Commissioner Adams. I don't see any more questions. Again, I want to thank staff for providing that report on special education. I sense, and I know my colleagues do, that we are, as a result of changes, we are more on top of these issues. We're communicating more regularly with the administration about things that are happening with special education, and that is key. Any other questions or comments? I don't see any. There we go. I'm sorry. All right, so I need a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing a particular employee and for the purpose of discussing collective bargaining issues. Is there a motion?
Second.
I think I know I heard Commissioner Adams second, but I didn't hear who made the motion.
Commissioner Malloy.
Oh, Commissioner Malloy, thank you. All those in favor of going into executive session for the purpose of discussing those matters that I just referenced a few minutes ago, indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Seems like the ayes have it. For the rest of you folks out there watching this Board of Education meeting, I do not think we're coming out of executive session to vote on anything. Is that right, Madam Clerk?
No, we have no reason to come back.
No, so I would suggest you folks who are diehard Gladiator Board of Education watchers should go home or if you're home, get some rest, or if you're like us, eat your dinner. God bless and stay safe. And we'll see you next Thursday. Is that this Thursday?
This Thursday.
This Thursday.
All right. Thank you very much.